Blood slides shattering across a cabin floor as Dokes levels a gun. Plastic curtains glowing orange while Lila watches the cabin burn. A kill room hidden in plain sight, suddenly flooded with police lights. Deb stepping into the church just as Dexter's knife sinks into Travis Marshall. Harrison screaming in the middle of a hurricane while Dexter's carefully staged suicide unravels in real time. These are not rare glitches in an otherwise flawless plan. These are the visual record of a life where control keeps slipping, where every system Dexter builds eventually collapses under its own weight. From Season 1 to New Blood, the trajectory is the same. He designs the perfect scenario, the investigation closes in anyway, and the show quietly asks us to accept that somehow. He still walks away. Let's kick things off with a rapid-fire montage of failure. A blood slide box in Dokes' hands. The cabin, not erased, but found. Dexter's boat, the slice of life, framed against the docks as the Bay Harbor butcher case tightens. Bodies in the ocean that were never supposed to surface, now charted on a map as a pattern. Each shot is a plan disintegrating, a promise of control meeting the consequences of reality. Over all of this, we hear Dexter's calm internal monologue. The familiar ritual: stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. He tells us he has a code. He tells us he has rules. He tells us he can manage his psychology, his urges, his double life. But the images refuse to cooperate. A sedative doesn't hold, and a victim wakes up under the plastic. A body dump site becomes an active crime scene. A supposedly anonymous kill intersects with an ongoing investigation he's working in the lab. We cut again. Dokes stepping into the Everglades cabin, gun raised, eyes already knowing. LaGuerta alone in that shipping container, staring at the evidence that points straight to Dexter Morgan. Saxon watching Dexter on a hidden camera, the predator turned into recorded data. No voiceover, no commentary, just the pattern. Every time Dexter's plan completely fell apart, the world almost caught up to him. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the dramatic confrontations. It's on the quiet plot holes underneath them, the contaminated crime scenes that never trigger audits, the missing hours no one in Miami Metro questions, the incriminating tools that vanish without procedural fallout. How many times should the code have failed long before the big showdown? How many investigations should have ended with Dexter in handcuffs instead of another night on the boat? The montage slows. The colors drain. We land on one last image, Dexter alone in a wooden cabin, first as the bearded lumberjack, then as Jim Lindsay in Iron Lake, framed by empty walls and snow-muted silence. No kill room, no family. Just the end result of every failed plan, every collapsed identity. A single chilling music sting, a hard cut to black, and then, in this video, we're going to rewind and ask the central question: how many of these disasters only work because the plot quietly looks away? So let's kick things off by breaking the biggest illusion the show ever sold us. Dexter tells us over and over that he is control. He has a plan for everything. A ritual. A code. A perfect system that keeps the monster caged and the investigation always one step behind. But when we actually watch what happens on screen, that image collapses almost immediately. From blood evidence he casually contaminates to crime scenes he revisits like they're private museums, Dexter behaves less like a meticulous predator and more like a walking crime scene violation. He disappears for hours during active manhunts, stalks suspects in broad daylight, and somehow Miami Metro never audits his lab work or his chain of custody. The universe just looks away. In this video, we're going to treat that gap as the real story. The central question isn't how does Dexter stay so careful, it's how does this level of failure not end the show in Season 1. Dokes literally finds the bloodslide box. Leela sees Dexter's darkness and burns Dokes alive to protect him. Miguel, Hannah, Saxon, season after season, people either know too much or stand one step from the truth. Yet the consequences rarely match the danger. Evidence is destroyed, witnesses die, investigations stall, and Dexter walks out of the wreckage like the laws of probability don't apply to him. To keep this clear, we're reframing Dexter not as a genius who never slips, but as a catastrophe that should have been caught multiple times. Plot armor isn't a side detail, it's the hidden architecture of his life. Every time a bloodslide is conveniently lost, every time security cameras somehow miss him, every time a colleague ignores a glaring red flag, the series quietly cheats on his behalf. The result is a paradox of control. The more Dexter insists he's in command, the more we see that only the writing keeps his world from total collapse. The focus is not just on the bodies on his table, but on the psychology of intention versus outcome. Dexter plans the kill room, the alibi, the dump site. He predicts how the investigation will react. Then reality intrudes. A witness wakes up early. A victim escapes. A random patrol car appears at the worst possible moment. What should be fatal mistakes become close calls, not because Dexter adapts brilliantly, but because the narrative bends to cushion the impact. So here's the provocation. What happens if we rewatch the entire trajectory assuming he's actually bad at planning? How many near misses suddenly read as giant plot holes? How many tense sequences turn into moments where Miami Metro would absolutely open a case file on Dexter Morgan and never close it? Along the way, each major section will trace a different phase of that unraveling, from the early seasons in Miami to Iron Lake, showing how the fantasy of control erodes until there's nothing left but the lie that started it. So to make that unraveling usable, we need to be precise about what we're actually tracking. The focus is not just on the plastic wrap table and a body strapped down under fluorescent light. When we say Dexter's plan, we're talking about an entire system. The stalking routine, the fabricated errand he feeds Rita or Deb, the forensic story he plants in the official investigation, and the long-term lie he thinks will keep everything sealed. Stalk the target. Confirm the pattern. Prepare the kill room. That's the visible ritual. But wrapped around it is a second ritual, the text message that explains why he's late, the casual joke at the station that steers suspicion away, the quiet edit to a blood report that nudges the case in a harmless direction. Each kill is really a nested set of plans, all designed to preserve control long after the knife comes down. In this video, we're going to treat those nests like case files. Each major section will zoom in on one of Dexter's supposedly airtight systems and run it like an audit. What did he want? What safeguards did he build? Where does logic, procedure, or basic human psychology snap so hard that it leaves a visible crack in the world of the show? When Dokes finds the bloodslides, for example, the failure isn't just that Dexter's trophy box gets exposed. It's that Miami Metro never launches the kind of internal review that would logically dismantle Dexter's entire career. To keep this clear, every major plan we examine will include both the immediate operation and the cover story that's meant to survive it. The Lila solution to Dokes is not just an explosion in a cabin. It's the idea that Dexter can walk back into the station, accept the Bay Harbor Butcher case closure, and live with a narrative that makes no psychological sense for anyone paying attention. The collapse is operational, relational, and existential all at once. Along the way, three dynamics are going to repeat like a drumbeat. Dexter's overconfidence in his own brilliance, which makes him believe a wiped knife handle fixes a crime scene he's already contaminated with his bare hands. His hunger for connection, which leads him to pull Lumen, Miguel, Hannah, and finally Harrison into his orbit, making every secret exponentially harder to contain. And his chronic underestimation of other people's intelligence, the assumption that colleagues, killers, and even his own sister will never fully connect the pattern staring them in the face. The central question becomes, what happens when a plan that works in one season poisons the logic of the next? When Miami Metro ignores one impossible coincidence, how does that shape every subsequent investigation? We'll track how convenient escapes, destroyed evidence, and rewritten motives don't just save Dexter in the moment. They warp his trajectory, bend his relationships, and eventually force new blood into choices that expose the graveyard of broken systems underneath his life. From here, we can finally start with the original design flaw. Harry's code is the first, and most catastrophic plan. Harry's code is the blueprint. But to really see how it fails, we need to map out the kinds of breaks it suffers. Not all collapses are equal. Some happen in the lab, some at the dinner table, and some at the core of Dexter's identity. So let's kick things off by drawing a clean line between three types of failure: operational, relational, and existential. To keep this clear, think of them as three layers of the same doomed plan. The surface layer is logistics. The middle layer is people. The deepest layer is belief. Operational failures are the nuts and bolts plot holes. This is where evidence, crime scenes, surveillance, or basic procedure should realistically expose Dexter, but somehow don't. A blood spatter analyst who constantly contaminates active scenes. A serial killer who dumps bodies in the same ocean from the same boat for years without a single meaningful forensic trace. Security cameras that exist in universe, yet mysteriously never catch Dexter slipping into a hospital room with a syringe. When the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation leans on Dexter's own blood slides in Season 2, we see how thin his control really is. Then the show has to twist itself into knots so that those slides are destroyed. Dokes is framed. And the system never truly audits the guy in charge of the blood. Relational failures live in the psychology of connection. These are the times Dexter's relationships blow up his plans because he misreads emotions, loyalty, or suspicion. He thinks Rita is a perfect cover because she doesn't expect much. Then her growing needs and pregnancy force him into a family fantasy he cannot sustain. He believes Deb will always see him as the protective brother. Then Seasons 6 and 7 weaponize that bond as she walks into the church and catches him killing Travis Marshall. Miguel, Leela, Hannah, Lumen, Harrison later in New Blood, each relationship becomes a variable Dexter cannot control, exposing how little he understands the consequences of pulling real people into his ritualized violence. He plans for bodies. He does not plan for feelings. Existential failures are the deepest cracks. These are the big picture collapses where Dexter's code, identity, or life strategy contradict themselves so badly that the writers have to retcon, handwave, or relocate him entirely. Harry's code is pitched as a moral firewall, then later revealed by Vogel as a clinical experiment, forcing us to reframe every ethical kill as data collection. Dexter swears he cannot change, then spends New Blood pretending to be Jim Lindsay, living without killing for a decade. Until Harrison arrives and the entire premise bends to accommodate a new version of the code. In this video, we're going to use these 3 categories as our spine. Each major section will track how a single plan fails first in the details, then in the relationships, and finally in Dexter's own story about himself. Along the way, we'll move from early operational cracks with Brian and Dokes, through catastrophic relational implosions with Rita and Deb, to the existential dead end of Iron Lake, where no version of the code can save him. Next, we start at the foundation, Harry's original experiment, and the first time the code fails on all 3 levels at once. So to actually dismantle Dexter's illusion of control, we need a structure that's as methodical as he thinks he is. No random nitpicking, no pausing every time a blood drop lands in the wrong place. We're going to walk through the story season by season, from the pilot all the way to New Blood, and track the exact moments where the plan breaks and the writing quietly steps in to protect him. Let's kick things off with the roadmap. Each season gets its own focused pass. Within that, we'll isolate 1 to 3 pivotal plans: the ice truck investigation and Brian's reveal, the Bay Harbor Butcher cover-up, the Dokes containment strategy, Miguel's apprenticeship, the Trinity pursuit, the Lumen partnership, the Debra secret, the Hannah romance, the fake death, and finally, Iron Lake. These are the operations where a single failure should have changed Dexter's entire trajectory, but instead reality bends around him. To keep this clear, we're not cataloging every continuity error or every time Miami Metro forgets how chain of custody works. The focus is not just on sloppy details. We're zeroing in on the biggest plot holes, the ones where surveillance, witnesses, or basic procedure should have ended the investigation with Dexter in handcuffs. When Dokes finds the blood slides, when Lila sees the kill room, when Saxon walks out of a police station alive long enough for Dexter to murder him in custody, those are the fractures that matter. Each major section will break down a plan the same way. First, intention, what Dexter believes he's designing, the fantasy of perfect control he's chasing. Second, safeguards, the rituals, alibis, and forensic tricks he trusts to keep the code intact. Third, the breaking point, the precise scene where the plan encounters a witness, a camera, a colleague's suspicion, or a simple human reaction he didn't anticipate. Fourth, fallout, the immediate consequences and the long tail, including every body the cover-up adds to the pile. On top of that, we'll tag each failure by category. Operational, when the logistics collapse, like Dexter contaminating an active crime scene with no repercussions. Relational, when someone close to him learns too much and has to be manipulated, framed, or killed. Existential, when a plan to quit, to run, or to reinvent himself only deepens the lie. And when a single decision fails on multiple levels, we'll cross-reference it as the damage echoes into later seasons. In this video, we're going to watch those failures escalate. Early on, the plot holes are narrow, a missing audit here, a skipped internal review there. But as the seasons progress, Dexter's mistakes become irreversible. Rita's death, Debra's corruption, Harrison's inheritance of the darkness, and the gaps in logic have to widen just to keep him walking free. How many disappearing bodies, erased cameras, and ignored conflicts can one universe sustain before the entire psychology of the show snaps? Because once we lay this structure down with Harry and Brian in Season 1, we're heading toward a point where no amount of plot armor can hide what Dexter really is. The question is, when does the fiction stop protecting him and start exposing us as willing accomplices? So let's kick things off where the mythology really starts lying to us. Season 1. When Dexter's perfect system is already leaving fingerprints all over Miami. We watch him stroll into active crime scenes like they're personal galleries. He touches bodies with bare hands. He moves blood-soaked dolls. He leans in close, breathing on evidence. In a real forensic lab, that is not quirky character flavor. That is a chain of custody nightmare that triggers audits, incident reports, and very pointed questions. Who altered this scene? Why is the blood spatter guy smudging trace? Why does his Dina keep showing up near victims he's not supposed to know? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Dexter Brake's procedure. It's on the institutional failure around him. Masuka never flags contamination. There's no lab supervisor demanding explanations. No internal investigation cross-checking his late-night lab access with the timing of bodies turning up across town. The show leans on his job as the ultimate cover, but the more we look at the logistics, the more it reads like the ultimate tell. And then the ice truck killer shows up, and the plot holes scale up with the psychology. Brian is essentially a walking audit of Dexter's access and control. He knows Dexter's schedule. He knows how close Dexter is to every major case. He stages bodies specifically to get Dexter's attention, and it works because Dexter is always there, always on scene, always inserting himself. That's the point thematically. Brian is the mirror. But it should also be the point operationally. Why is the same blood spatter analyst orbiting every signature murder in the city? We get Dexter at the ice rink crime scene, Dexter at the hotel, Dexter at the shipping yard. We get him personally handling dismembered limbs, personally interpreting patterns, personally feeding the investigation its narrative. At some point, any competent command staff asks the central question: why is the Bay Harbor area's most distinctive serial crime series effectively co-authored by our forensics guy? And yet, the forensic consequences just evaporate. Dexter keeps late hours in the lab, runs unlogged tests, sneaks blood slides in and out of evidence spaces, and no digital access log ever pings. No security camera ever catches a weird angle. No colleague ever files a complaint about his disappearances during active manhunts. How many red flags does one precinct need before someone prints out a list of names and circles Dexter Morgan in red ink? Here's the pattern interrupt. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation doesn't begin with a body. It should begin with a spreadsheet, with someone noticing that one analyst's workload, scene presence, and extracurricular boat ownership form a pattern. Instead, the show delays that reckoning for seasons, relying on willful institutional blindness so Dexter's plan can keep pretending to work. Each major section will trace that delay. Because the collapse of the Bay Harbor Butcher myth doesn't come out of nowhere. It's already written into every unasked question in Season 1. And nothing embodies those unasked questions more than the neat little horror show Dexter keeps in his air conditioner. The blood slide box. 21st century serial killing distilled into a plastic, alphabetized trophy case, sitting a few feet from where he sleeps. Let's kick things off with what that box actually is in universe. It's not just a creepy quirk or a serial killer flourish. It's a complete, self-curated archive of the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. Each slide is a victim. Each victim is a case file. Together they form a perfectly consistent MO, a time-stamped killing trajectory, and a direct physical link between Dexter's home, his lab, and the bodies washing up on Miami's shores. From a forensic standpoint, this is not a clue. This is the answer key. So when Dokes finally finds it in Season 2, the central question is not will Dexter get framed? It should be. How does this not trigger the most aggressive internal audit in Miami Metro history? Dokes discovers the slides in Dexter's private space while actively surveilling him, after already flagging his odd hours, his boat, his proximity to multiple victims. To keep this clear, we have a veteran cop following a hunch, uncovering the single most incriminating piece of physical evidence in the series, literally tied to Dexter's fingerprints and blood work. From there, a real investigation would explode outward, chain of custody on every slide, testing for trace DNA on the box itself, cross-referencing Dexter's lab access logs, his work schedule, his presence at every crime scene that generated those samples. Who processed the blood? Who signed the reports? Why does the same analyst's name keep showing up where the Bay Harbor Butcher's victims appear? Instead, the show narrows the blast radius. The slides become a shortcut to pin everything on Dokes, then a narrative trapdoor to drop the problem out of sight. Once Dokes dies, the institutional absurdity really kicks in. The task force accepts the slides as conclusive proof that he was the butcher. But no one reopens Dexter's files. No one asks why the evidence that supposedly condemns Dokes was first discovered in a box that should have been logged, bagged, and examined by half the lab. In a department obsessed with trace fibers and blood spatter angles, nobody pauses to wonder who actually handled the blood on those slides. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that disconnect between stated forensic rigor and selective blindness. The focus is not just on Dexter's clever plans, but on how the world around him has to keep looking away for those plans to function. How does the most incriminating physical evidence in the entire series transform into a one-and-done plot device, instead of remaining a permanent ticking bomb under Dexter's life? That silence around the slide box sets the pattern for every later escape, where evidence appears, flares up, and then conveniently disappears so the illusion of control can stagger on. And the next time that illusion cracks, it won't be hidden in an air vent. It'll be walking around, asking questions, and refusing to disappear on cue. That walking around asking questions presence becomes literal in Season 2, when the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation steps into the frame. On paper, this is the moment Dexter's entire plan should collapse. Miami Metro forms a task force to hunt a meticulous serial killer who dumps dismembered bodies at sea, while their own blood spatter analyst owns a boat, keeps irregular hours, and is directly tied to dozens of homicide files. Let's kick things off with the basic setup. From the marina where Dexter's slice of life is docked, to the exact ocean corridors where the trash bags surface, the geography of his kills is practically a dotted line back to his slip. He leaves work late, vanishes on boat rides, and somehow his off-duty movements keep syncing with disposal windows identified by the investigation. To keep this clear, if we're mapping victim dump sites, known tides, and access to a vessel, Dexter is not one of 1,000 suspects. He's on the short list. In any competent investigation, you don't just build a psychological profile, you cross-match logistics. Who has routine access to blood evidence? Who can disappear from the lab during critical hours? Who owns or regularly uses a boat that fits the cut patterns on those trash bags? Dexter hits all three categories. Yet no one pulls marina records to see whose craft is routinely out at night. No one checks gas receipts, harbor cameras, or even runs a basic overlap between his case assignments and the recovered victims. Then the FBI arrives. Frank Lundy walks in framed as the anti-Dexter, methodical, brilliant, a man whose entire identity is wrapped around control and pattern recognition. The focus is not just on his reputation. The show keeps telling us he sees what others miss. And he does notice some things. He clocks that the butcher is careful, disciplined, maybe even law enforcement. He narrows the profile to someone comfortable with blood, with forensics, with crime scenes. But that's where the plot hole yawns open. Because once you say, out loud, that your unsub is likely connected to law enforcement, the logical next step is brutal in its simplicity. You vet everyone. Background checks, financials, work histories, psychological screenings. Who has trauma in their past? Who was adopted under strange circumstances? Who keeps turning up adjacent to major investigation beats? The central question isn't why doesn't Lundy suspect LaGuerta or Dokes. It's why he never fully runs Dexter through that filter when multiple soft red flags are right there. We get tension. Dokes circling Dexter, the slide box discovered, Lundy observing from the periphery. Each major section will escalate the pressure, then stop one move short of the obvious, subpoena lab logs, search personal property, track boat usage, interview neighbors. Any one of those mundane procedural steps detonates Dexter's illusion of control instantly. Instead, the investigation behaves like a spotlight with a dimmer switch, bright enough to scare Dexter, never bright enough to expose him. And if Season 2 can bend an entire federal task force around his blind spots, what happens when the show starts rewriting the rules of evidence for people who actually know his secret? So let's talk about the one time the spotlight actually did land on Dexter, and the writers basically kicked the plug out of the wall. James Dokes isn't just a rival cop with attitude. He's the closest thing the series ever gives us to a functioning investigation of Dexter Morgan, and watching that case evaporate in a fireball tells us a lot about how fragile this world's logic really is. Let's kick things off with the trajectory of Dokes' suspicion. From Season 1, he reads Dexter's psychology on pure instinct, no emotional affect at crime scenes, disappearing during key raids, always one step too informed. He tails Dexter to sketchy locations. He catches him dumping tranquilizer vials. He literally walks in on Dexter in the Everglades, standing over a dismembered body in garbage bags. In any real department, that alone would trigger an internal review. Here, it just makes Dokes obsessed. By the time he finds the blood slides in Dexter's air conditioner, the plan is over. Those slides are a personalized trophy system that matches Bay Harbor butcher victims by blood type and case file. Concrete image, concrete evidence, concrete chain of custody. Then Dokes tracks Dexter to the cabin, sees the plastic, hears the confession by context. Even if he never makes it back alive, he has a car full of surveillance notes, a pattern of complaints, and a physical link between Dexter and the butcher investigation. The case should outlive the man. Instead, we get Lila and the cabin explosion, one convenient arson event that behaves like a narrative eraser. The focus is not just on the fire itself, but on how the script treats fire as if it incinerates questions. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this move. When physical reality should complicate Dexter's life, the show retools it to clean the slate. A law enforcement officer and a suspected serial killer die together in a kill room, and the follow-up is, what, exactly? To keep this clear, think about what would actually happen. Full forensic workup on the cabin, origin point of the blaze, accelerant analysis, autopsies comparing Dokes' injuries to the blast pattern, a deep dive into his phone records, GPs, and case notes to understand why he was out there alone. The central question for any real agency would be obvious. Why was James Dokes investigating this specific forensic tech off the books? Yet Miami Metro barely scratches the surface. There's no systematic review of Dokes' surveillance on Dexter, no serious re-examination of Dexter's lab work that had been quietly steering the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force, no internal affairs reckoning for how a decorated sergeant became a secret suspect and then a convenient corpse. Dokes doesn't just die. His entire body of evidence is treated as emotional noise rather than procedural gold. And that's the real collapse. The show needs Dexter's plan to survive, so it quietly asks an entire police department to stop acting like police. Along the way, that becomes the template for later seasons. As long as the person who sees Dexter clearly disappears, their questions burn away with them. But what happens when the person who sees him clearly doesn't work in law enforcement at all, and can't be written off as a rogue cop gone wrong? When Miguel Prado walks into Dexter's life, the show doesn't just hand him a new friend. It hands him a walking political grenade, a high-profile assistant district attorney from a powerful Cuban-American family who suddenly starts sneaking off with the blood spatter guy and then dies under a cloud of suspicion. That should ignite a citywide firestorm. Let's kick things off with who Miguel is inside the world of the show. He's not some anonymous line prosecutor. He's on TV. He's tied to major cases. His brother's murder becomes a public spectacle, a rallying point for law and order politics in Miami. And then, in the middle of that, we watch Miguel's psychology tilt off axis, erratic courtroom behavior, strange late-night absences, escalating rage. The central question, how does nobody, inside or outside the investigation, meaningfully pull on the Dexter thread that runs through all of this? Dexter's plan is, on paper meticulous, train Miguel under the code of Harry. Channel his violence, maintain control. To keep this clear, Dexter thinks he's building a controlled experiment. He picks the targets, he sets the rules, he supervises every step. But almost immediately, the apprenticeship collapses. Miguel stalks his own victim. He improvises a kill without Dexter's oversight. He pokes around in Ellen Wolf's life, leaving a trail of arguments, threats, and very public animosity that any halfway competent investigation would map out. From secret rooftop meetings to hushed conversations in parking garages, the show gives us concrete images of these two men conspiring in spaces that are anything but private. Miguel shows up at Dexter's office. Dexter visits Miguel's home. They argue at a wedding, at work, at crime scenes. Along the way, Miguel is visibly changing, and Dexter is the new variable in his life. Yet when Miguel disappears and then turns up dead, Miami Metro barely glances at the obvious pattern. Why was the Ada suddenly glued to their forensic analyst before everything went off the rails? This is where the plot hole yawns wide. A major prosecutor vanishes after a public feud with a defense attorney who also winds up dead. And the official response is a few sad speeches and then narrative amnesia. No grand jury, no internal review, no task force combing through Miguel's recent contacts, phone records, or calendar entries that would scream Dexter Morgan over and over again. The focus is not just on what the characters miss, but on what the show refuses to let them even ask. And then there's the problem of what Miguel knows. He's seen Dexter's methods. He understands the ritual. He knows the plastic, the knives, the code, the double life. A politician's son with that kind of secret doesn't leave zero trace. Where are the encrypted notes, the burner phones, the confidants he hints to, the patterns in his casework that echo Dexter's signature? Each major section will keep showing us this same move. Someone finally pierces Dexter's illusion of control, then dies without leaving the durable evidence that their position, power, and personality make almost inevitable. If that's how the show treats a star Ada, what happens when Dexter entangles himself with someone whose entire identity is built on chasing monsters like him? And that brings us straight to the season where Dexter doesn't just flirt with exposure from the outside. He invites it in, shakes its hand, and hands it a knife. Season 3 is where the Code of Harry stops feeling like a rigid operating system and starts behaving like a narrative rubber band, stretching to cover whatever Dexter needs to do next. To keep this clear, we have to rewind to how the code is originally sold to us. In the early seasons, Harry's rules sound brutally simple. Only kill those who deserve it. Never get caught. Keep emotional distance. Avoid unnecessary risk. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. The whole psychology of Dexter's plan is built on those pillars, and the show treats them as sacred text. Break them, and the dark passenger doesn't just feed, it collapses everything. Then, Miguel Prado walks in. On paper, Miguel is Harry's nightmare, a high-profile Ada, emotionally volatile, with a public crusade against killers. The Code of Harry should flag him as pure risk. Yet Dexter decides to experiment with bringing Miguel into his world, as if he's beta testing a feature, not detonating the core safeguard of his life. He reveals his process. He lets Miguel into a kill. He hands over the ritual like it's a shared hobby. How is that not a direct violation of never get caught and avoid unnecessary risk in the most obvious way possible? In this video, we're going to keep asking the central question: is this really Dexter evolving, or is the code just bending so the plot can go where it wants? The focus is not just on who Miguel is, but on how the show frames Dexter's choice. Instead of treating this as catastrophic failure of control, the narrative calls it an apprenticeship gone wrong, a tragic misread of character. The problem becomes Miguel's instability, not Dexter's decision to break every structural rule Harry ever gave him. That's where the retcon energy creeps in. Along the way, new flashbacks appear that conveniently expand what Harry supposedly said. Suddenly, Harry is more flexible, more conflicted, more maybe this is okay if you're careful. His teachings morph in real time to justify Dexter's latest behavior. When Dexter wants to target a different kind of criminal, we get a memory that says Harry anticipated that. When Dexter wants to feel less alone, we get hints that Harry feared isolation more than exposure. The code isn't holding Dexter accountable, it's being rewritten to endorse his current trajectory. By season 3, the Code of Harry is no longer a fixed moral system. It's a floating excuse, a label Dexter slaps on whatever he already plans to do. And once the show lets that happen with a state's attorney, what happens when the next exception isn't a powerful ally, but family? So when the exception becomes family, we land in season 4, where Dexter doesn't just bend the code. He tries to bend time itself. Let's kick things off with the basic layout of his life at this point. He's married to Rita in the suburbs, he has a newborn screaming through the night, 2 stepkids with school runs and emotional crises, a full-time job as Miami Metro's blood spatter expert, and, on top of all that, a secret ongoing career as a meticulous serial killer. On paper, it's the fantasy of control. In practice, it should be instant collapse. To keep this clear, imagine a single day on Dexter's calendar. Night stalking and kill room prep. Dawn feedings with Harrison. Morning commute to an active homicide investigation where he's expected to process scenes, file reports, and sit through Batista's briefings. After work, family dinners, house repairs, couples conversations with Rita about intimacy and trust. Then back out into the dark to dump bodies and clean tools before anyone wakes up. Sleep becomes a theoretical concept, not a biological need. The central question is not could a clever person juggle a lot? It's whether a human body, subject to fatigue and error, could maintain this schedule for weeks while also hiding an entire second life from a spouse and an entire squad of detectives. The show's answer is effectively, don't worry about it. We watch Dexter vanish for hours during active manhunts, like when the Trinity investigation is heating up and everyone is on call, yet he somehow finds windows to surveil Arthur, build kill rooms, and drive all over Miami without Rita or Deb hammering him with follow-up questions. Family crises flare up, Harrison ends up in the hospital, Rita is begging for presents, and Dexter is still slipping away to stalk or clean up a mess from last night's plan. At most, he gets a mildly annoyed, "Where were you?" followed by an easy deflection. Here's the pattern interrupt. If any other character behaved like this, Miami Metro would open an internal investigation. We've already been told this is a department that can track, sell records, pull security footage, and cross-check overtime. Yet when it comes to Dexter, the systems that caught the Bay Harbor butcher pattern just stop applying. Colleagues who once noticed his odd hours and creepy calm now shrug off his disappearances in the middle of manhunts. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between what the show tells us about procedure and what it actually enforces on Dexter. Season 4 is where that gap becomes structural. The focus is not just on his psychology as a new father, but on the logistics that should be shredding his cover story every time he sneaks off during a briefing or shows up exhausted to a blood-soaked crime scene he secretly caused the night before. And this is exactly why the Trinity arc matters for our trajectory. Arthur Mitchell is not just a rival killer, he's a mirror of the perfect family man disguise pushed to its breaking point. When Dexter's already impossible schedule collides with a villain who lives inside the same suburban fantasy, every crack in Dexter's facade should be exposed. The question is, does the story let that exposure happen, or does the plot armor get even thicker? So let's kick things off with the scene that should have shattered Dexter's entire illusion of control. A quiet house. A phone that keeps ringing. A baby crying somewhere off-screen. Then the bathroom door swings open and we see Rita, dead in the tub, Harrison sitting in her blood. It's a deliberate mirror of Dexter's origin story, and it's staged as destiny. But if we slow down the timeline, the destiny starts to look a lot like a narrative shortcut. To keep this clear, we need to rewind through those final Trinity episodes. Dexter stalks Arthur Mitchell, inserts himself into the Mitchell family, and plays the role of apprentice and avenging angel all at once. We have the church confrontation, Dexter in the confessional, Arthur realizing he's been hunted by the Bay Harbor butcher in everything but name. Dexter finally gets him on the kill table, plastic everywhere, blood slides ready, and executes the plan. From Dexter's perspective, the threat is neutralized. The season is over. Then he walks into his own crime scene at home. Here's the central question. What should that actually trigger in a world with even semi-functional law enforcement? A serial killer who targets families has just murdered the wife of a Miami Metro blood spatter analyst who was actively involved in the investigation. That is not a tragic coincidence. That is a 5-alarm institutional crisis. Every task force, every internal investigation, every media outlet should be asking why Trinity reached Dexter's house, what Dexter knew, and when he knew it. Instead, the show gives us grief without scrutiny. We get the emotional collapse, but not the procedural one. There's no extended review of Dexter's movements during the manhunt, no serious interrogation about why he was constantly disappearing, no forensic deep dive into his work on the Trinity case. Remember, this is the same department that once built an entire Bay Harbor butcher profile off bloodslides and dump sites. Now their own analyst's wife is killed in a perfect copycat tableau, and no one wonders if Dexter was a specific target or a potential connection. Operationally, Rita's murder should leave a massive trail. Phone records, traffic cameras, Arthur's surveillance of Dexter's life. Any halfway competent investigation would map Trinity's approach to that house and inevitably brush up against Dexter's secret schedule. Yet the evidence just evaporates. No one re-audits Dexter's lab work. No one cross-references his role in multiple high-profile serial cases. The focus is not just on what's missing, but on how cleanly the narrative sidesteps anything that might tie him closer. And that's where the existential plot hole opens up. The show uses Rita's death as rocket fuel for Dexter's psychology and season-to-season trajectory, but it refuses to live with the real-world consequences of a serial killer's family being targeted. Socially, Dexter should be radioactive. Legally, he should be under a microscope for years. Instead, the story treats this as a tragic backstory upgrade and moves on. Along the way, the world of Dexter quietly admits it will bend reality before it truly interrogates its main character. The next cracks we'll look at push that even further, as the investigations around Dexter get bigger, while the questions somehow get smaller. Season 5 is where the show quietly admits how big Dexter's footprint really is, and then pretends it can erase it with a fade-out. We go from a single butcher to an industrial operation, the Barrel Girls. Multiple women, abducted, tortured, murdered, bodies sealed in barrels and dumped like toxic waste. A whole network of perpetrators, from Boyd Fowler to Jordan Chase and his inner circle. And in the middle of this industrialized horror, a living witness, Lumen. She remembers faces, locations, methods. She becomes the one thing Harry's code was never designed to handle. A partner inside the investigation and inside the trauma. Let's kick things off with the scale of the case. Miami Metro literally pulls dozens of decomposing bodies out of the water. There are task forces, press conferences, interagency coordination. This is the kind of investigation that, in the real world, spawns federal reports and multi-year reviews. Yet Dexter doesn't just brush up against it. He weaves himself through it. He stalks Boyd while processing Boyd's victims. He hides Lumen in the middle of an active manhunt. He turns suspects into targets on his table, while his own lab is running their blood. To keep this clear, Dexter and Lumen generate or alter crime scenes at a staggering pace. Boyd's house, the swamp site, the motel rooms, the abandoned camp, the final kill at the campfire circle, each one is a forensic nightmare. Dexter moves bodies, scrubs blood, disposes of plastic, and manipulates evidence streams that his own colleagues are cataloging. How many times does he vanish from the station during critical windows? How many times does he show up on the periphery of witnesses, CTV, or traffic cams that the Barrel Girls task force should be pulling? The season never wants us to ask. The central question is not just how does he get away with it this week, but how does this case not haunt every later investigation he touches? We have a surviving victim who was caged with other women, multiple perpetrators who interacted with one another, left digital traces, shared locations, a blood spatter analyst who was weirdly present at Boyd's scene, at the barrels, at Chase's death. In this video, we're going to keep circling that gap between the scale of the crime and the microscopic scrutiny Dexter somehow dodges. And then, the endgame. Lumen and Dexter dismantle the entire ring in a compressed spree of revenge killings. Chase dies in a kill room that should light up every alarm, high-profile celebrity, suspicious circumstances, a survivor on site. Instead, Lumen simply leaves. No deposition, no victim advocate follow-up, no attempt to expose the man who taught her how to kill. A traumatized survivor walks off-screen with zero paper trail. The focus is not just on what that does to Lumen's psychology, but what it does to the show's internal logic. A case this big, this public, with this many loose ends, should shadow Dexter for the rest of the series. Instead, it evaporates. Along the way, the world of Dexter learns a dangerous trick. If it can make the Barrel Girls disappear, what else can it bury when the next investigation gets even closer? If the Barrel Girls case can vanish, then Deborah Morgan's instincts can too, and that's where the show's most intimate plot hole lives, right between a brother and a sister who share crime scenes, confessions, and car rides, but not the one truth that actually matters. Let's kick things off with proximity. From season 1 through season 5, Deb is practically glued to Dexter's trajectory. She's on the task force for the ice truck killer, she survives Brian's table, she works the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation from the inside. She dates the ice truck killer without knowing it, partners with Lundy while he tracks the butcher, hunts Trinity while Dexter quietly studies him. Deb is always 2 feet from the body, 2 steps from the plan, 1 conversation away from the collapse. And yet, she never quite lands on Dexter. The central question is, how? How does the show keep the smartest, most emotionally attuned cop in Dexter's life from connecting the most obvious dots? To keep this clear, look at the pattern. Deb stands outside Brian's kill room, literally on the other side of the plastic, while Dexter chooses his brother over her and then rewrites the scene as a suicide. She interrogates Dokes about why he's obsessed with Dexter, hears again and again that something is off, and still redirects the suspicion outward. We watch her walk into houses Dexter has just left, examine victims he personally selected, and debrief him about killers he has already wrapped in plastic. Short scene. Short distance. Longer denial. In season 4, she's investigating Trinity's cycle while Dexter secretly inserts himself into the Mitchell family. She notices Dexter's erratic behavior, the lies about work, the strange absences during an active serial investigation. The writing flirts with revelation, then pulls her back with a new lead, a new crisis, a new emotional wound. That's the narrative trick. Deb's love becomes a shield. Her fierce loyalty, her need for one person who doesn't abandon her, gives the show cover to stretch her blindness far past what her experience and psychology should allow. This is a detective who sees through Lundy's professional armor, who senses Miguel's corruption, who can read a crime scene in seconds. But when it comes to Dexter, the investigation stops at his front door. Why doesn't she ever audit his lab work? Why doesn't she question why her brother is always orbiting the biggest cases? Here's the pattern interrupt. Imagine Deb as any other cop in Miami Metro, with the same evidence trail, a blood analyst tied to multiple victims, a history with Brian, a connection to Rita's murder, a presence at nearly every major crime scene. Does that version of Deb really let this go for 5 seasons? By the time she walks into the church and sees Dexter stabbing Travis Marshall, the discovery feels both inevitable and bizarrely overdue. The focus is not just on the shock of that moment, but on the long trail of near recognitions that had to fail for it to arrive so late. Along the way, the show cashes in years of her selective blindness in a single devastating image. And that delay has consequences, because once Deb finally sees everything, the next question is how long she can keep lying to everyone else. And once Deb is finally in the church, seeing Dexter as he really is, the series quietly runs into a new problem. How do you keep this man's entire history from collapsing under basic scrutiny? Season 6 answers with a different kind of denial. Not just emotional this time, but technological. Institutional, the world itself has to look away. Let's kick things off with the scale of the Doomsday investigation. We're not dealing with alleyway stabbings anymore. We're talking about horsemen on the causeway, a mannequin angel on a rooftop, a body sewn into a giant golem, victims displayed in a greenhouse and on a skyscraper ledge, while news choppers circle overhead. Every tableau is a sermon to the entire city. In any realistic manhunt, that kind of apocalyptic spectacle triggers intense surveillance, interagency task forces, federal oversight, and a digital paper trail a mile long. Yet over and over, Dexter moves through that chaos like a ghost. He's alone in the abandoned hotel where Travis paints his revelation mural. Alone on the rooftop crime scene, arriving implausibly early, accessing restricted spaces with minimal backup. Alone at the marina when he sabotages Travis's boat. He manipulates blood, moves evidence, and slips into kill rooms adjacent to active doomsday sites, while the investigation supposedly runs at maximum pressure. How many times can the lead blood analyst wander off the grid during a citywide panic before someone asks where he actually is? To keep this clear, the issue isn't whether Dexter can be clever. It's that the show keeps forgetting the surveillance infrastructure it already established. We see traffic cams used in other seasons. We know Miami is ringed with toll booths, CTV on bridges, security cameras in skyscrapers and churches. Phones ping towers, credit cards leave timestamps. But whenever Dexter needs a clean escape from a crime-adjacent location, those systems quietly stop existing. Why doesn't a single traffic cam place his car near multiple doomsday scenes at impossible hours? Why doesn't building security flag him entering restricted floors alone, off duty, right before another revelation display appears? The central question becomes less, can Dexter outsmart everyone? And more, why isn't anyone using the tools they already have? The focus is not just on plot armor, but on how the show's own technological reality bends to protect his illusion of control. Along the way, we get small tells, surveillance footage that's conveniently corrupted, witnesses who see nothing, chain of custody that never gets audited even as bodies pile up in theatrically symbolic ways. Season 6 quietly establishes a pattern that will define the later trajectory. The more public and spectacular the crimes become, the more the series has to ignore procedure, cameras, and basic digital forensics to keep Dexter's extracurricular life off the record. His plan doesn't survive contact with a believable modern investigation, so the investigation itself has to fail. And as the tableaus get bigger in future seasons, that gap between what the world should notice and what it actually notices only grows wider and more dangerous. So when the world refuses to notice Dexter's crimes, the show has to bend reality around him. But then we hit the one moment where reality finally walks through the door. Literally, Deb pushes open the church doors, Dexter's knife already buried in Travis Marshall's chest, plastic hanging like a confession booth, and for the first time, the investigation and the secret life occupy the same frame. There's no clever cutaway, no convenient blackout, just that stunned triangle: Dexter, Deb, Travis on the table. Years of near misses, awkward interruptions, and almost confessions collapse into a single, wordless beat, where Deb's brain is trying to reconcile her brother, her boss, and the man in front of her. He's not at a crime scene. He is the crime scene. To keep this clear, the church isn't just a plot twist. It's the retroactive answer to a long list of questions we've been carrying. How did Deb never connect his constant disappearances, his proximity to every major serial killer, the way he always arrives one step ahead of the investigation? In that instant, the show reframes her blindness as something more like emotional denial. She didn't fail to see patterns. She refused to believe what those patterns implied. Think back: Doak's suspicions, Brian targeting Deb, the Bay Harbor butcher case built from Dexter's own bloodslides. Deb has always been orbiting the truth. The central question becomes less, why didn't she figure it out, and more, how much did she unconsciously protect him? The church scene suggests that every earlier plot hole around her suspicion is not just sloppy writing, but a psychology of avoidance. Loving Dexter meant editing reality, and that's where the existential stakes snap into focus. Up to this point, Dexter's double life is theoretical to the people closest to him. Harry knows, then dies. Leela, Miguel, Lumen, they're temporary confidants, narrative pressure valves that let him confess and then reset. But when Deb walks in, the reset button breaks. His most important relationship is instantly contaminated by the full, bloody truth of the code. He can't pretend this is about justice anymore. She sees the plastic, the tools, the ritual. She hears him explain the plan. The focus is not just on a sister discovering her brother is a killer, it's on Dexter watching his entire self justifying myth collapse in her eyes. If Deb doesn't buy the code, what is he? What if the one person whose love he trusts becomes the mirror that finally refuses to lie? And yet, along the way, the show pulls its punch. Deb's horror is real, but the narrative keeps circling back to her love as a cushion, a reason she helps cover up Travis instead of detonating Dexter's life. Does the series truly commit to the consequences of that church, or does it quietly turn the most honest exposure of his failure into one more extension of his control? The next choices they make together will answer that, and they're about to drag the entire trajectory of the show into even darker territory. Deb walking into that church was the moment the fantasy wobbled. Season 7 is where it should finally collapse. And for a few episodes, it almost does, because LaGuerta does something this show rarely allows. She treats the Bay Harbor butcher investigation like an actual investigation, instead of a ghost story everyone agreed to stop telling. Let's kick things off with her decision to reopen the case. A single slide of blood turns up at a crime scene, and unlike everyone else, LaGuerta doesn't file it under weird coincidence. She revisits the old files, rereads the reports, and starts asking the central question Miami Metro has avoided for years. Did it ever really make sense that James Dokes was the butcher? The pattern of ocean dumps, the timing, the logistics of those kills, she can feel the plan behind them, and it doesn't match Dokes' psychology at all. To keep this clear, the show walks us through her methodical approach. She pulls Dokes' travel records, looks at murders that happened while he was away, and notices the killings didn't pause. She revisits the marina, tracks down Dexter's old boat slip, and quietly cross-matches it with dump sites. She checks his work history against major Bay Harbor butcher scenes, and over, Dexter is there. Same lab tech, same analyst on the blood, same guy with convenient access to every piece of evidence that could have exposed him. For once, the focus is not just on Dexter's charisma, but on the paper trail he's been leaving since season 1. Along the way, we get something rare in this series, the feeling that the world is finally reacting logically to Dexter's long-term pattern of control. LaGuerta sees that his job, his boat, and his crime scene overlaps form a single, coherent trajectory pointing straight at him. It's the show briefly honoring its own logic. If a captain with decades of experience connects these dots, how could the system not follow? And then we hit the shipping container. LaGuerta corners Dexter and Deb in the same kind of industrial box that birthed his trauma and his code. She has a warrant, a theory, and just enough evidence to force the issue. Dexter's plan is to kill her and stage it as a shootout. Deb walks in, frozen between the woman trying to restore reality and the brother whose entire life is built on escaping it. One gunshot. LaGuerta dies. With her, the most grounded investigative threat in the series simply vanishes. Here's the pattern interrupt. A high-ranking captain is found dead at a suspect crime scene, tied to reopen Bay Harbor butcher evidence, and nothing happens. Where's internal affairs? Where are the feds? Where's the independent task force tearing through Dexter's cases, his ocean access, his chain of custody, if Dokes' posthumous guilt once triggered national news? Why doesn't LaGuerta's very real suspicion do the same? Instead, the aftermath is a narrative blackout. No massive external review. No systemic audit of Dexter's work. The investigation that almost broke his illusion of control is absorbed into that illusion, rebranded as one more tragic, unexamined loss. It's a plot hole you could drive a bloodslide box through, and it sets the stage for the show's final, strangest attempts to pretend the consequences have finally caught up. Because if LaGuerta's death doesn't bring the world down on Dexter, what possibly could? The next seasons will try to answer that, but they'll have to do it on a world the show has already taught us not to trust. So when the container door closes on LaGuerta and the gunshot echoes, we hit one of the show's biggest paradoxes. The cop who hates corruption more than anyone becomes the person who buries the clearest corruption of all. Deb isn't just a supporting character in Dexter's story here. She's the entire justice system choosing the serial killer. To keep this clear, we have to rewind to who Deb has always been. From season 1, her whole psychology is built around the badge. She rages against lazy detectives, calls out brass for protecting their own, and spends years pushing back against the institutional rot that lets monsters slip through Miami Metro's fingers. She hates the idea of a dirty cop almost as much as she hates the killers they fail to catch. That's her compass. It's blunt, loud, and usually pointed at the truth. Then we get to that shipping container. LaGuerta in cuffs, Dexter on the floor. Deb with a gun, literally standing between the system and her brother. The central question in that moment is not just who will she shoot. It's can Deborah Morgan live with either choice? The show answers the first question decisively. She picks Dexter, pulls the trigger, and then, almost immediately, starts helping him stage LaGuerta's death as a shootout. That's not a tiny ethical slip. That's a complete collapse of the identity we've been sold for 7 seasons. Realistically, that decision should shatter her career and psyche beyond repair. She has killed her boss, framed a crime scene, and blown up an investigation she believed in. There is no version of Deb who walks back into Miami Metro, flashes her badge, and pretends the chain of command and the murder book still mean anything. Yet the plan the writers give us is exactly that, she spirals. But she still functions well enough to keep Dexter's cover. The show does give us guilt. The drunk driving crash, the private detective work, the panic attacks, and the scenes where she can barely look at Dexter without shaking. But along the way, she's still clearing cases, still participating in investigations, still maintaining the operational fade that lets Dexter stay in control. Her breakdown is intense, but it's selectively intense. It hits her when the plot wants drama, then steps aside when the plot needs her competent. How does that not break the internal logic of her character? And once Deb has crossed this line, a cascading logic problem opens up. If she can bury LaGuerta, what else would she ignore? How many suspicious gaps in Dexter's movements, how many inconsistencies in his reports would now get waved away because acknowledging them would mean revisiting that night? More importantly, how does the system around her not notice that something fundamental has changed? This is an officer tied to the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, to Travis Marshall, to LaGuerta's death, and yet there's no serious internal affairs probe, no external review, no career-ending scrutiny. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that pattern. The focus is not just on Dexter's individual failures, but on how the world keeps bending to protect him, even as the people inside it fracture. Deb's complicity is the test case, and the next stretch of the series will show just how far the show is willing to stretch belief to keep his illusion of control alive. So when we hit Season 8, the fantasy and the protection finally collide. The investigation, the cameras, the protocols, the hurricane warnings, everything that should close in on Dexter instead melts away just long enough to let him vanish. This is where the illusion of control stops being Dexter's psychology and becomes the show's. Let's kick things off with Oliver Saxon, a serial killer who films his murders in HD, uploads them, stalks Dexter through public spaces, and literally walks into Miami Metro to talk to the press. We watch him stab, taunt, and record. We see laptops, hard drives, online videos, a trail of digital fingerprints that, in any coherent world, would trigger a massive, multi-agency investigation. Yet the central question hangs there. Where is the lasting evidence tying Dexter to any of this? To keep this clear, Saxon isn't a shadowy rumor. He dates Dexter's neighbor. He threatens Dexter's family. He's caught on camera in a kill room with Dexter, then later in an interrogation room where Dexter assaults him. There are hospital security feeds, precinct recordings, news footage. Each major section will show us that the more documented Saxon becomes, the more the narrative has to pretend that documentation doesn't exist, because any honest paper trail would put Dexter in the frame alongside him. Now we move into the hospital, where procedural reality just collapses. Deb is shot. Saxon is in custody. The building should be saturated with staff, alarms, and cameras. Yet Dexter calmly disables Saxon's life support, wheels him into another room, and murders him on tape, in theory, with a pen. No code blue. No nurses rushing in. No security replaying footage and asking why a blood spatter analyst is casually visiting a high-risk suspect. How does a man already linked to the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation walk through that much liability without a single serious consequence? Then comes the storm. Dexter walks into Deb's room, unplugs her, and pushes her body out of the hospital on a gurney under hurricane lockdown conditions. Think about that. Evacuation protocols, disaster triage, law enforcement presence, all overridden so he can load a corpse onto a boat that every cop in Miami knows he owns. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what a world like this would do and what the plot needs it to ignore. He sails straight into a hurricane and is presumed dead. No Coast Guard reconstruction of his last known movements, no audit of security footage from the hospital, no real investigation into why Deb's condition suddenly worsened right after Dexter visited. The focus is not just on the improbability, it's on how the show grants him a mythic, almost supernatural exit, free of institutional follow-through. Along the way, the series has been training us to accept these collapses, but the hospital and hurricanes stretch that training to the breaking point. Because if the world can bend that far to let Dexter disappear, what happens when it finally refuses to bend at all? So when the world finally refuses to bend, what does the show do? It cuts to trees, to silence, to a man with a beard, an axe, and dead eyes staring into nothing. That final lumberjack tableau is supposed to be Dexter's ultimate plan for control, a self-imposed exile. Far from Miami, far from Deb, far from anyone he might destroy. No blood slides, no boat, no kill room, just isolation as atonement. On paper, it sounds like a tragic, quasi-heroic sacrifice. In practice, it functions as an existential plot hole that swallows the entire series. Because to keep this clear, Dexter has never been a character who thrives in a vacuum. His psychology is built on three pillars: structure, targets, and the code. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. That ritual is how he regulates his urges and maintains the illusion of order. Strip that away, strand him in the woods, with no investigation to hide behind. No forensics lab to anchor his days, no Harry to narrate the rules. And we're meant to believe, what, exactly? That the dark passenger politely powers down? The central question the lumberjack ending raises is not does Dexter deserve to suffer, but how would this even work for more than a week? This is a man who could barely handle family dinners without sneaking off to track a suspect. He failed every attempt at normalcy in the suburbs, in fatherhood, in marriage, in relationships with Lila, Miguel, Lumen, Hannah, yet suddenly total isolation, with zero structure and zero code, is framed as a stable, long-term solution. And then there's the hurricane. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these convenient natural disasters and institutional blind spots, because that storm is the ultimate reset button. 1 minute Dexter is at the center of a collapsing web of consequences. Deb shot, LaGuardia dead, the Bay Harbor butcher legacy hovering over every case file. The next minute, a literal act of God wipes the slate clean. No body. No boat. No serious multi-agency investigation into a high-profile cop killer vanishing at sea. The focus is not just on improbability, it's on how the hurricane pretends to wash away more than evidence. It implies that Dexter's urges, his methods, even his operational habits can be abandoned as easily as changing a zip code. But behavior that entrenched does not evaporate. If anything, removing the code and the constraints of Miami Metro should make him more dangerous, not less. So the lumberjack ending becomes a narrative dodge. Instead of following Dexter's trajectory toward the logical endpoints the show itself has set up, arrest, death, exposure, the finale parks him in a vague, thematically muddled limbo. He's not punished in a concrete way, not redeemed in a coherent way, not unmasked in a cathartic way. He simply survives off-screen, a ghost the writers don't have to account for. Pattern interrupt. Imagine that same final image, but with sirens in the distance or a knock at the cabin door. Instantly, the entire series reorients around consequences instead of escape. And that gap between what we got and what the story earned is exactly what New Blood tries, and struggles, to close next. So New Blood opens by finally answering that imaginary knock at the cabin door, and then pretending the sirens never really arrived. We jump ahead to Iron Lake, where Dexter has reinvented himself as Jim Lindsay, mild-mannered shop worker, boyfriend to the local cop, living in a snow globe of routine. Feed the goat, stock the rifles, date the chief of police, smile at everyone, and pretend the last decade was just a bad dream. On paper, it looks like a new plan. Total abstinence. No kills for nearly 10 years. No blood-slides, no boat, no ocean. Just a man in the woods, jogging on frozen lakes and chanting a personal version of the code that now boils down to one command: do not kill. The central question is simple. Does anything we know about Dexter's psychology make that remotely plausible? To keep this clear, we have to line up what the original series told us. Repeatedly, Dexter frames his urges as compulsions, cyclical, escalating. When he tries to stop in Season 2, he deteriorates fast, sloppy at work, distracted with Rita, tempted by random strangers. Harry and Vogel both describe him as someone who needs structure around the kill, not someone who can just meditate it away. Yet New Blood asks us to accept that the same man, now without a code, without therapy, without any real support system, just white-knuckles it for a decade because reasons. It is not that abstinence is impossible in universe, it is that the show gives us almost no investigation of how. No sponsor, no replacement ritual, no real consequences from withdrawal. The dark passenger, once framed as a constant internal pressure, becomes more like a light switch the writers can flick on when the plot requires a body. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between stated psychology and narrative convenience, because Iron Lake is built right on it. And the second Harrison steps off that bus, the whole Iron Lake plan collapses on cue. The pattern repeats almost beat for beat. Emotional connection arrives, and operational control disintegrates. Dexter breaks his decade-long abstinence within days, kills Matt Caldwell in a rage that barely resembles his old ritual, hides the body on land in a town where everyone knows everyone, and then improvises a cover story that depends on half the population ignoring glaring red flags. Does that feel like a new Dexter, or the same old collapse in a new coat of snow? The focus is not just on the plot hole of his supposed self-control, but on how fast his new identity unravels once he tries to fold family back into the equation. He lies to Angela about his past. He lies to Harrison about who he is. He contaminates an active investigation in the woods. He repeats every Miami mistake, only now without the professional buffer of a big city and a busy lab. New Blood ends up functioning as both continuation and indictment of Dexter's myth of control. Give him a clean slate, a fake name, a tiny town, and the chance to finally live without the code, and he still engineers a life that cannot hold. Along the way, the series exposes how much of Dexter's supposed discipline was always just narrative protection. And the next cracks appear exactly where we would expect, in the investigations closing in, and the people who finally start asking the right questions. When Harrison steps off that bus in Iron Lake, the fantasy of control Dexter has been selling himself collapses in a single, quiet moment. A son appears out of the past, and suddenly this neat routine of selling guns, dating the chief, and jogging in the snow is not a fresh start. It's a crime scene waiting to be processed. We watch the strain hit immediately. Jim Lindsay has a rigid plan, no kills, no code, no history. Harrison's arrival detonates all three. The fake name can't withstand a teenager asking basic questions. The emotional distance can't survive a kid who remembers abandonment. And the dark passenger can't stay buried when Dexter's guilt and nostalgia start rewriting the narrative of why he left Harrison in the first place. The focus is not just on a father and son reconnecting. It's on a carefully engineered cover identity buckling under relational pressure. To keep this clear, think about what Harrison logically has to know. He remembers Rita's death. He knows his father vanished during the Bay Harbor butcher fallout. He's had years with Hannah, who absolutely understands Dexter is dangerous, even if she romanticizes it. Are we really supposed to believe that in a world of Google, message boards, and true crime podcasts, Harrison never once typed Dexter Morgan Miami murder into a search bar? The central question becomes, how does this kid track Jim Lindsay to Iron Lake without leaving a digital trail that any halfway competent investigation could follow back the other way? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what the world of the show contains and what it conveniently ignores. Iron Lake is tiny. Everyone gossips. Everyone knows who's new, who's lying, who's hiding. A teenage stranger shows up looking for the town's most mysterious resident, and we get almost no background checks, no local rumor mill asking, wait, why did your dad fake his name? Angela, a cop obsessed with missing girls and cold cases, can build a Bay Harbor butcher investigation from a podcast, but doesn't immediately run Harrison through every database she has. From a collapsed Miami life to a fake identity in the woods to a son materializing out of nowhere, each major section will show the same pattern. Dexter believes he can compartmentalize. Reconnect with Harrison. Maintain Jim Lindsay. Keep the past under ice. But in a small town, with smartphones, social media, and a police chief sleeping in his cabin, this plan is not just optimistic. It's delusional. Harrison's presence should be a walking red flag that triggers curiosity, paperwork, and digital digging from everyone around him, not just a few emotional confrontations. And that's the real plot hole. Harrison is written as an existential mirror for Dexter. But he should also be a forensic spotlight. If the son can find the father, who else can? If the boy starts asking questions, who else starts looking? The show mostly dodges that investigation to protect their tragic reunion. But the moment someone finally does follow the data trail, the illusion of safety in Iron Lake doesn't just crack. It shatters, and it pulls us straight into the next, far more dangerous exposure. And when that illusion shatters, New Blood quietly swaps one failing institution for another. Miami Metro's blind spots are gone, but Iron Lake's law enforcement steps in as a softer, cozier shield, wrapping Dexter's second life in small-town fog. On paper, that should be a harder environment to hide in. In practice, it becomes a new layer of plot armor. Let's kick things off with Angela. The show frames her as everything Miami claimed to be, but rarely was: competent, curious, grounded in real-world police work. She's the chief, the one officer actually reading missing persons reports, the only person in the entire franchise who types Bay Harbor butcher victims into a search bar and follows the data. The psychology of the character is built around intuition and persistence. And yet, for most of the season, she lives with Dexter Morgan, sleeps next to him, and still doesn't clock how many red flags orbit Jim Lindsay. From the hunting cabin where Matt Caldwell disappears, to the abandoned summer camp where Dexter just happens to be nearby, to Harrison's knife incident at school that Dexter expertly de-escalates, the investigation keeps circling his orbit. He offers tactical advice. He reads crime scenes with eerie precision. He casually explains blood patterns and trauma signatures that a small-town shop clerk shouldn't know. The central question becomes unavoidable. How many times can one man be at the center of violent incidents in a town of a few thousand before the pattern demands scrutiny? To keep this clear, think about scale. In Miami, Dexter could hide in the statistical noise of a major city. In Iron Lake, every bar fight is local news. Every stranger is remembered. That intimacy should make Dexter more vulnerable, not less. Yet the show often treats Iron Lake PD like a downgraded Miami Metro. Fewer resources, fewer procedures, and a willingness to accept Dexter's paper-thin explanations because the plot needs him close to the investigation. And then there's the modern world. We're not in early-season Miami anymore. We're in a universe of cloud databases, interagency task forces, body cams, and instant background checks. Once bodies start dropping, once Kurt's victims are tied to decades of disappearances, once Angela connects the Bay Harbor butcher to fresh evidence, how likely is it that Jim Lindsay survives even moderate scrutiny? Social security records, employment histories, federal databases. This is not a place where a fake identity should withstand a motivated chief with a laptop and a reason to dig. Here's the pattern interrupt. Angela actually does what no one else ever did. She follows the trail, links Dexter to the Bay Harbor case, and confronts him. The focus is not just on her courage, but on how much the show had to ignore to delay that moment until the finale. Along the way, traffic cameras don't catch his drives, search warrants don't materialize, and no outside agency ever swarms this suddenly high-profile crime hub. Each major section will keep bringing us back to this tension between Dexter's belief in control and the systems that keep accidentally protecting him. Because Iron Lake isn't just a new setting. It's the final, fragile stage for the collapse of his institutional camouflage, and the next failure comes from even closer to home. If Iron Lake is the collapse of Dexter's camouflage, Miami was the magic trick that should never have worked. Again and again, we watch him contaminate scenes, vanish during operations, and leave physical traces that, in any sane investigation, would have stuck to him like blood on latex. Yet somehow, the system blinks. Let's kick things off with the most literal smoking gun. The blood slides. Tiny trophies, cataloged by victim, stored in his air conditioner and then in his apartment. Dokes finds them. Lundy's task force knows they exist. The FBI builds a Bay Harbor butcher profile around a meticulous, forensically obsessed killer. And when Dokes dies and the slides are found in his car, that's it. No audit of who else had lab access. No review of Dexter's chain of custody on every major case. No question of why the department's blood spatter analyst owns a microscope identical to the one used to make them. The central question isn't just how Dexter gets away with this once. It's how the institution never learns from its own near miss. Then, there's the boat. Season after season, we see the slice of life sliding out of a public marina loaded with plastic and murder tools. It's registered in his name. It's tied to Miami Metro's own parking lot. Later, LaGuardia literally tracks the Bay Harbor butcher dumps to Dexter's slip, and even that investigation has to be sabotaged from the inside to fail. No Coast Guard pattern analysis, no long-term look at dock records, no Dina recovery from the ocean dumps until it serves the plot and then conveniently goes nowhere. To keep this clear, we're not nitpicking one bad night. We're tracing a recurring operational failure. Surveillance and procedure exist in universe, but they only work when the writers need pressure, never when they'd actually close the loop. Hospital cameras catch Dexter stalking Trinity's family. Security systems should see him moving Saxon, killing in hallways, accessing restricted areas at impossible hours. Saxon literally records Dexter attacking him and uploads it. That video should be a permanent, duplicable piece of evidence. Instead, it's deleted, ignored, and never meaningfully archived, as if a major suspect's digital confession lives on exactly one hard drive. Meanwhile, Miami Metro behaves like a lab with no internal organs, no random retesting of Dexter's blood work, no conflict of interest review when his own brother, wife, girlfriend, or nemesis keeps landing on his table or in his orbit. He disappears during manhunts, shows up last to scenes he should be first to, and nobody clocks the pattern beyond a raised eyebrow. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this idea. Dexter isn't a flawless killer. He's a man whose survival depends on a world that must be unrealistically incompetent to sustain his illusion of control. Along the way, that institutional negligence bleeds directly into his relationships, because the next failures aren't just procedural, they're personal. And that brings us to the softest part of Dexter's life, which somehow becomes the sharpest weapon against his illusion of control: his relationships. The people he thinks will stabilize the monster are the ones who keep kicking out the supports under every plan. Let's kick things off with Rita. On paper, she's the perfect cover: trauma, low expectations, a quiet domestic routine that hides his nightly hunts. In practice, Rita's very normalcy creates pressure he never plans for: marriage, kids, a house in the suburbs. Every new layer of the family fantasy locks Dexter into tighter timelines, riskier improvisations, and more lies. Her death at the end of season 4 isn't just a tragedy. It's the bill coming due for a relationship he treated as a prop instead of a volatile, unpredictable human bond. Lila is the first big warning that Dexter's psychology around intimacy is its own code of failure. He seeks her out as a solution, a way to understand his darkness without judgment. She reads him too well. She follows him. She finds the truth. The cabin fire, the murder of Dokes, the obsession with Astor and Cody, these are not random twists. They're the direct consequences of Dexter underestimating how far a person will go once he lets them orbit his secret. Miguel Prado escalates that pattern. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this idea. Every time Dexter invites someone into the code collapses. Miguel starts as a powerful ally, a legal shield who can redirect any investigation. Dexter misreads Miguel's ambition, teaches him the ritual, and suddenly the system he thought he controlled is in someone else's hands. The cemetery kill, the unauthorized victims, the leather gloves. Miguel turns Dexter's private methodology into a public liability. Lumen, Hannah, Deb, Harrison. Each arrives as an answer and ends as a threat. Lumen is supposed to be a contained project. Help her finish her list, then let her go. Instead, she ties his killings directly to an active rape investigation and to a warehouse full of evidence. Hannah is a fantasy of being understood without judgment. She responds by poisoning him, manipulating Deb, and turning every shared secret into leverage. Did he really not see that coming? Deb is the most brutal example. To keep this clear, Deb begins as the one person he vows to protect from his world. By the church scene, she's literally walking into the kill room. Her discovery of Travis Marshall's murder doesn't just expose Dexter's crimes. It detonates her career, her mental health, and the last plausible barrier between Dexter and total exposure. And then there's Harrison. The child he keeps as proof he can be a father, not a monster, becomes the living investigation of his life. Every lie Dexter tells that kid is a delayed explosion. The central question becomes, when your own son is the one reading your pattern, how long can the fantasy last? Because the next failure isn't just about a blown cover story. It's about what happens when the family Dexter built to save himself starts inheriting the very darkness he spent a lifetime trying to script. And this is where the plot holes stop being about cameras that mysteriously malfunction or detectives who never check timestamps. This is where the gaps open up inside Dexter himself, when the code, the psychology, and the long-term plan stop lining up with the man we've been told we're watching. Let's kick things off by going back to the original promise of the Code of Harry. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, no innocence, no mistakes. Harry sells it as a strict, almost ritualistic system, a way to put walls around the darkness and keep it purposeful. In those early seasons, that rigidity is Dexter's religion. The code gives him language, structure, and the illusion of control over something he insists is otherwise uncontrollable. But to keep this clear, we have to track how that system quietly mutates. The focus is not just on who Dexter kills, but on how often he bends the rules and calls it growth instead of failure. He spares Trinity's son. He improvises with Lumen. He kills Miguel not because of innocent victims, but because Miguel threatens his autonomy. By the time we reach Hannah and Saxon, the code is less a moral firewall and more a flexible permission slip he rewrites whenever the investigation closes in or his emotions flare. The central question becomes, is Dexter evolving, or are the writers retrofitting his ethics to match whatever version they need this season? Family man with Rita, craving normalcy. Avenger with Lumen, channeling trauma into a shared mission. Self-exiled lumberjack, punishing himself with isolation. Iron Lake recluse, pretending the darkness just, went into hibernation. These identities arrive like hard resets, not organic steps on a single trajectory. We jump from one persona to the next and are told it's all the same code, the same core psychology, still in control. Here's the pattern interrupt. Imagine if Harry's code had actually stayed non-negotiable. No exceptions for love interests, no spontaneous team-ups, no off-screen decade where the dark passenger politely waits while Dexter sells guns and chops wood. Suddenly, half the late series plotlines don't just feel implausible, they become impossible. Instead, the show treats each new phase as a fresh start. Consequences are selectively remembered. Deb's breakdown, Harrison's trauma, even Harry's suicide as a response to what he created, all get folded back into a narrative where Dexter can still tell himself he's following the plan. That's the existential failure, the collapse of the original premise that this code was a safeguard rather than a story-wide rationalization. And that collapse doesn't stay contained in the later years. It reaches backward. When we rewatch seasons 1 through 4, knowing how casually Dexter will abandon or reinterpret the code, those early, tight character choices start to look less like a coherent design and more like the first draft of a myth the show keeps editing. Because the next layer of plot hole isn't about who Dexter kills at all. It's about who keeps building codes for him, and what happens when every new rulebook is just another lie he's willing to believe. Harry sitting in a car with a young Dexter, calmly explaining how to fake a smile or mimic grief, is one of the most chilling images in the series. A father figure turning childhood into a rehearsal space for deception. But if we look at those flashbacks not as tragic backstory, and instead as design documents for every later disaster, the entire trajectory of Dexter's failures starts to look inevitable. Let's kick things off with what Harry actually teaches. In those garage and squad car lessons, he drills 3 things: simulate normal emotions, pick deserving targets, and never get caught. Stalk the target. Confirm their guilt. Prepare the kill room. On paper, it sounds like control. In practice, it assumes a frozen world where variables don't fight back. Harry trains Dexter as if Miami's institutions, technology, and people will always behave the way they do in his head. To keep this clear, think about how rarely Harry's code accounts for change. There's no chapter on digital surveillance, on GPS pings, on security cameras multiplying every season. We watch Dexter waltz into crime scenes, touch bodies, move evidence, and walk away without a single internal audit of his lab work. That isn't just plot armor, it's the show unconsciously inheriting Harry's blind spot that systems won't really investigate one of their own. The central question becomes, what happens when a code built for Harry's era collides with a world that keeps updating? Harry never anticipates institutional oversight that might actually function. He never imagines another forensic tech reviewing Dexter's chain of custody, or a supervisor asking why this one blood spatter guy is connected to so many major investigations. So Dexter's plans are built on an operating system that's already obsolete. And then there's the human piece Harry refuses to see. He insists Dexter can't feel real attachment, so the code is structured like Dexter is a lone wolf. No contingency for a girlfriend, a wife, kids, or a sister who becomes the emotional center of his life. Yet Harry himself models the opposite. He grows attached. He panics when he sees Dexter's early kills. He covers them up anyway. He's not a dispassionate engineer. He's a frightened cop improvising. Those moral compromises are the real slow fuse. Harry uses Dexter as a weapon against the monsters the system misses, then lies to that same system to keep his project alive. When he finds the nurse Dexter killed, and chooses to bury it rather than expose it, he demonstrates situational ethics dressed up as duty. Is it any surprise Dexter later applies that same flexible morality to Dokes, to LaGuerta, to anyone who threatens the illusion of control? In this video, we're going to keep seeing that pattern. Dexter's most catastrophic plans aren't deviations from Harry's framework, they're logical extensions of it. The focus is not just on the kills, but on how a flawed code, handed down as gospel, quietly primes every future collapse. Because if this is what one dead cop's rulebook can do, what happens when new mentors start rewriting it in real time? Harry is just the prologue. Once other people start rewriting the code, Dexter's life stops being a clean duality and turns into a pressure cooker with way too many lids. To keep this clear, We need to look at the sheer number of identities he's running in parallel and ask a simple question. How long could any of this stay hidden in a world that obeys basic probability? At peak complexity, Dexter isn't just a blood spatter analyst with a hobby. He's a forensic specialist embedded in active investigations, a husband to Rita, a father to 3 kids, a brother and emotional support system for Deb, a mentor to killers like Miguel and Lumen, and a full-time vigilante. Later, he reboots as Jim Lindsay, the small-town boyfriend and father in Iron Lake, while still being, essentially, the Bay Harbor butcher in witness protection from himself. Each role isn't just a label. It's a new set of calendars, expectations, and watchful eyes. Every added role multiplies the variables he has to control. Work hours, stakeouts, school events, date nights, custody schedules, court testimony. Alibis that must line up with cell records, security cameras, eyewitnesses, emotional performances tailored to each audience, grieving coworker, attentive dad, stoic brother, nurturing mentor, harmless shop clerk. One missed pickup, one wrong timestamp, one neighbor with a Ring camera in New Blood. Perfect planning isn't just difficult here, it's mathematically impossible over time. Season 4 weaponizes that impossibility. Marriage to Rita, a newborn, a serial killer investigation, and the Trinity hunt all collide. We watch Dexter fall asleep at the wheel, lose track of Trinity, and literally misplace a bound victim in a storage container. His time is so fragmented that his control is reduced to triage. The central question becomes, with this much chaos, how is he not leaving a forensic trail a mile wide? The show gives us near misses, but not the mundane follow-through that would realistically expose him. Season 7 doubles down. He's juggling fatherhood to Harrison, a full caseload, a relationship with Hannah, and, most destabilizing, Deb knowing the truth. He's managing her psychology, his own urges, LaGuerta's Bay Harbor butcher investigation, and a new wave of kills. He disappears during active manhunts, manipulates evidence, and somehow no one at Miami Metro runs a serious audit on the analyst, whose life intersects with almost every major case file on the board. The more plates he spins, the more the narrative has to pretend gravity doesn't exist. That's the real tension of the show. The focus is not just on whether Dexter will be caught, but on how long he can outrun the statistical certainty of a slip. The pressure of the double and triple life creates exhilarating suspense, yet the biggest plot holes appear when those pressures never fully cash out. Near exposures reset. Investigations stall. Characters who know too much die at exactly the right moment. Along the way, we stop watching a genius avoid failure and start watching plot armor masquerading as competence. And if the pressure cooker keeps hissing without ever truly exploding, we have to ask, what happens when the evidence itself starts bending to protect him? So what happens when the evidence bends? It starts with Dexter's own narration bending right along with it. He keeps telling us he's an emotionless observer, a predator above the herd, while episode after episode shows him doing something very human and very dangerous, misreading the people around him. In this video, we're going to track how that misreading becomes one of his most consistent points of failure. The focus is not just on the blood and the bodies, but on Dexter's psychology as a planner. He assumes everyone else is dumber, weaker, less capable of violence. And every time that assumption cracks, the writers have to scramble to protect him from the consequences. Let's kick things off with Rita. Dexter treats her, especially in the early seasons, as a safe, damaged, permanently passive partner. He builds his entire domestic cover on the idea that she will never really question his absences, never connect the late nights, the emotional distance, the mounting lies. But she does. She notices the missing time, the secretive phone calls, the mysterious trips. Her suspicions push him into last-minute improvisations, fake Narcotics Anonymous stories, rushed confessions about addiction, sudden proposals. Each patch keeps the relationship moving, but it also creates plot holes around how a smart, observant woman fails to dig deeper while living with a forensics expert tied to multiple major investigations. Then Miguel. Dexter reads Miguel as a passionate but controllable ally, someone whose rage he can harness under the code of Harry. He thinks he can drip-feed Miguel the truth, set boundaries, stay in control of the partnership. Instead, Miguel escalates, improvises his own kills, and immediately demonstrates a capacity for violence Dexter never anticipated. That miscalculation forces Dexter into a frantic course correction, sabotaging Miguel's trust, planting evidence, rushing a kill room setup that conveniently avoids wider scrutiny from law enforcement. The central question: how does a high profile Ada spiral that publicly without triggering a deeper investigation into the one man he was obsessively attached to? Lila is the same pattern. Inverted, Dexter initially underestimates her obsession, assuming she's just another unstable fling he can discard when the plan demands it. He misses the intensity, the stalking, the willingness to burn down lives. Literally, by the time he realizes she's studying him, not worshiping him, he's already improvising. Faked breakups, sudden relocations, emergency rescues. The show leans on her chaos to erase Dokes and save Dexter, but it also leans on Dexter's arrogance to explain why he didn't see any of this coming. And LaGuerta. Again and again, Dexter discounts her instincts. He treats her as political noise, not a real investigative threat. Yet she is the one who follows the Bay Harbor butcher pattern, the one who revisits old cases, the one who senses the trajectory of his lies. His failure to respect her intellect forces the narrative into contortions, conveniently missed surveillance, discarded leads, and finally a last-second kill that resolves her investigation without really resolving what Miami Metro should have uncovered. To keep this clear, Dexter's chronic misreads do two jobs at once. They are a believable character flaw, a narcissistic killer overestimating his control, and a narrative convenience. Each time he underestimates someone, the writers get a new crisis, a new improvised cover story, a new kill room in an implausibly empty location. But the fallout rarely matches the setup. Careers don't implode, internal reviews don't materialize, and the institutional memory of Miami Metro resets just in time for the next plan. Along the way, we stop just questioning Dexter's ethics and start questioning the world that keeps letting his arrogance slide. And that raises the next problem. What happens when it's not just people he misreads, but the entire system he's hiding inside? When we look at the people who actually see through Dexter, the illusion of control doesn't just crack. It should shatter the entire show's reality. And yet, every time someone gets close enough to name what he is, the narrative quietly sweeps them off the board and wipes their fingerprints from the investigation. To keep this clear, let's kick things off with Dokes. He doesn't just have a hunch. He tails Dexter, catches him at suspicious scenes, finds the blood slide box that directly ties Dexter to the Bay Harbor butcher pattern. In any plausible world, that's enough for an internal probe, chain of custody review, at least a sealed file with Dexter's name underlined 3 times. Instead, Leela blows up the cabin, Dokes dies. And Miami Metro simply accepts that their most aggressive cop was secretly a prolific serial killer, with no forensics to back it up, no audit, no follow-through, threat erased. Lila herself knows too much. She sees Dexter's violence, understands his psychology, literally murders Dokes for him. She could have left a confession, a recorded conversation, something that says, Dexter Morgan is the real butcher. Instead, she runs, Dexter kills her in Paris, and the only person who fully grasped the scope of his darkness vanishes in a foreign country with zero narrative residue. Miguel is the next escalation. He learns the code, participates in kills, and becomes a corrupt mirror of Dexter's fantasy of mentorship. Miguel has motive, knowledge, and access. One panicked email to Ellen Wolf's colleagues, one hidden recording about Dexter's training program, and the entire season's trajectory changes. Instead, Dexter strangles him on a rooftop, stages a cartel hit, and the institutions around them swallow the story without asking why a high-profile prosecutor's best friend, a blood spatter analyst, keeps orbiting these bodies. Then, we have Hannah. She sees Dexter kill, understands the code, and survives. She poisons Deb, escapes custody, and later runs off with Harrison. If even once she had created a Deadman Switch file naming Dexter as a serial killer, or mailed a letter to Miami Metro outlining his pattern, his world collapses. Instead, the show treats her as a romantic escape hatch, then quietly kills her off-screen in New Blood, leaving no trail that ever reaches law enforcement. LaGuerta and Saxon actually try. LaGuerta reopens the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, connects Dexter to the marina, to Dokes, to the shipping container. Saxon records Dexter attacking him and uploads evidence. Both should be nuclear. Yet LaGuerta dies in a closed container with Deb and Dexter, no cameras. No surviving witness willing to tell the truth. Saxon is executed in a holding cell, and the tape never triggers a systemic review. Angela in Iron Lake gets closest to behaving like a real cop, assembling the Bay Harbor case and the Matt Caldwell murder. But even she confronts Dexter alone, in a small-town station, without spreading that evidence across multiple agencies. The focus is not just on who dies, it's on how neatly their knowledge dies with them. Sudden deaths, unrecorded confrontations, destroyed or ignored evidence. If even one of these characters had acted like a real person trying to protect themselves or others, emailing files, scheduling press conferences, involving outside jurisdictions, Dexter's entire life would have ended seasons earlier. Instead, the world keeps glitching around him, which leads to the next problem. What happens when the physical evidence itself starts obeying the same convenient gravity? When the laws of physics start bending around Dexter, the next thing to go is the show's own internal rulebook. Evidence isn't the only thing that disappears. The code, the psychology, even Dexter's basic skill set begin to flicker depending on what the plot needs that week. To keep this clear, let's kick things off with the code itself. Early seasons frame it like iron law, no innocence, no collateral damage, no emotional entanglements. Dexter agonizes over killing an apparently innocent man in season 1, and the ice truck killer arc leans hard on his fear of contaminating the code with personal feelings. Compare that to Leela, Miguel, Trinity, and later Hannah. People around Dexter die, get framed, or are spared not because they fit Harry's criteria, but because the writers want a new love interest, a rival, or a tragic twist. By season 8 and New Blood, Dexter isn't following a code so much as reverse engineering it to justify whatever he already wants to do. The central question becomes, is this a compulsion he cannot control, or a hobby he can put on ice whenever the narrative jumps forward? In Miami, his need to kill is treated like a physical addiction. He sneaks out on his honeymoon, he spirals when he tries to stop, he constantly frames the dark passenger as an unstoppable engine. Then, New Blood arrives and tells us he went a decade without a single kill. No secret hunting trips, no relapses. Just willpower. If he can white-knuckle it in Iron Lake for 10 years, what exactly made all those earlier I-have-no-choice monologues feel necessary? The trajectory of his needs shifts from inevitability to convenience. That same slide shows up in his expertise. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this gap between the meticulous technician we're sold and the sloppy operator we actually see. Early on, Dexter is the guy who lectures us about trace evidence while double-bagging blood slides and bleaching every surface. By the later seasons, he's stabbing people in public spaces, abandoning half-prepped kill rooms, and contaminating active scenes with his bare hands. The investigation almost never catches up. No audits of his lab work. No serious review after multiple colleagues, lovers, and suspects connected to him die under bizarre circumstances. Each major section will show that as the continuity frays, Dexter stops feeling like a coherent character and starts reading as a bundle of shortcuts. His biggest choices, sparing Hannah, training Zach, killing Logan in New Blood, don't grow organically from a stable code or a consistent psychology. They feel like levers pulled to get him to the next collapse. Along the way, the writers quietly retcon his limits so that any failure can be both inevitable and somehow not disqualifying. And if the show can rewrite Dexter's inner rules that easily, what does it do to everyone who ever trusted him on the outside? Because once we admit the writers can rewrite Dexter's inner rules on a whim, we have to tackle the next uncomfortable layer, the myth of Dexter as this perfect apex predator. The marketing image is clear. The posters, the promos, the taglines all sell us a surgical monster who is always 10 steps ahead. But when we line up the evidence, how often is Dexter actually in control? And how often is he just surviving because the universe bends around him? From blood he splashes at crime scenes to witnesses he leaves breathing, the trajectory is not precision. It's barely controlled chaos. Let's kick things off with the core contrast. The show tells us Dexter is hyper-competent, a meticulous plan for every target, a code for every situation, a kill room that erases every trace. Yet the investigation reality inside the story keeps exposing cracks. He contaminates active scenes, touches bodies, moves evidence, and somehow no one in a major metropolitan forensics unit ever runs a serious audit of his work. That's not mastery. That's a structural blind spot the size of Miami. To keep this clear, we can reframe his survival as a three-part illusion. First, luck. Dokes finds the blood-slides, confronts Dexter, and then conveniently dies in an explosion that destroys the only airtight proof. Later, the boat that has carried countless corpses leaves no meaningful trace, no traffic cam pattern, no Coast Guard curiosity. Again and again, key physical evidence is lost, burned, or ignored at exactly the right moment. That's not the dark passenger. That's the Deus Ex Machina. Second, other people's love. Debra walks into the church as Dexter kills Travis. That should be the end. Instead, her loyalty becomes a shield that distorts the entire investigation. Rita's kids, Harrison, even Hannah's twisted affection all function the same way. They explain away his disappearances, his erratic behavior, his proximity to every major case. Love doesn't just blind them, it actively patches the plot holes that should sink him. Third, systemic incompetence on a grand scale. Miami Metro almost never questions why their blood guy is always at the center of the storm. Chain of custody is treated as a suggestion. Surveillance cameras malfunction when Dexter needs a clean escape. Potential whistleblowers, Leela, Miguel, Hannah, Saxon, either die, disappear, or decide not to leave lasting, credible evidence. The focus is not just on Dexter's psychology here, but on a justice system that keeps failing upward around him. Once we see that, the emotional tone of the series shifts. It stops playing as a power fantasy about a man who mastered his darkness and starts reading like a slow-motion tragedy about a man who believes his own legend. He thinks the code gives him control. In reality, every victory is a near disaster disguised as competence. Pattern interrupt. Think about your favorite Dexter being clever moment. The meticulous kill room, the improvised alibi, the last-second switch of evidence. Now replay it with the plot holes turned back on. How many of those scenes only work because a cop doesn't do basic follow-through? A camera is magically pointed the wrong way, or a character who knows too much simply chooses silence. In this video, we're going to keep pressing on that gap between what Dexter thinks he's orchestrating and what the world is quietly forgiving. Because once the legend of the perfect predator cracks, we're left with something far more disturbing. A man who was never really driving, only riding the wave until it finally crashed. If the last section was about the world silently letting Dexter's mistakes slide, this one is about Dexter trying to walk away from the mess as if he's still the one in charge. Over and over, we watch him stand in the ruins, announce, "I'm done," and then step right back into the same trajectory. Let's kick things off with the most brutal turning point, Rita's death. The image is seared into the series' psychology. Baby Harrison crying in blood, Dexter whispering that this is his fault, then deciding the solution is to quit. No more killing, no more code. But that retirement is built on denial at every level. He underestimates the compulsion, overestimates his capacity for a normal suburban life, and ignores the fact that the consequences have already detonated. Within episodes, the abstinence plan collapses. He kills again. He lies to the investigation. He doubles down on the very behavior that got Rita murdered, insisting it's now for her. After Deb's breakdown in seasons 7 and 8, we get the same script with a cruel variation. Deb learns the truth, kills Lagerta, spirals into addiction, and Dexter decides the central question is, can he give up killing for Deb's sake? He toys with a Hannah escape fantasy, a clean slate in Argentina. The focus is not just on a geographical move, but on a psychological reboot. Yet the plan rests on ignoring Deb's trauma, Harry's failed experiment, and the fact that Dexter's presence is the core contaminant. Under pressure, the fantasy implodes. Deb's guilt resurfaces, Saxon enters the picture, Dexter can't stop hunting, and the new life becomes one more lie he tells himself, as Deb dies in a hospital bed he put her in. Then comes the hurricane. Dexter literally sails into a storm, fakes his death, and the narrative frames it as a twisted act of mercy. By erasing himself, he will protect everyone. On paper, it's an exit. In practice, it's an existential plot hole. If he's such a slave to the dark passenger that he must vanish, how does he then white-knuckle it as a lumberjack for years? If he can control it that long, why couldn't he do it before? The show wants the grand tragic gesture and the fantasy of control, without reconciling them. New Blood tries to answer that by dropping him in Iron Lake as Jim Lindsay, but it just repeats the pattern. New name, new job, new rules. And within a few episodes, the reinvention cracks. He kills Matt Caldwell, botches the cover-up, lies to Angela's investigation, and drags Harrison into a fresh cycle of secrets and violence. Every time reality presses, Dexter doesn't step away from killing. He steps deeper into improvisation. To keep this clear, each escape plan fails the same way. Denial at the start, collapse under pressure, and a forced return to violence. Along the way, the writers keep asking us to believe Dexter is both a man of iron control and a creature of pure compulsion. That tension isn't just character conflict. It's the show's biggest existential plot hole, and it sets up the final question. When Dexter's plans fail for the last time, whose illusion actually dies? When we talk about whose illusion actually dies, the show gives us a brutal answer: Deb's. Her trajectory is the clearest line from idealism to collapse. We meet her as the scrappy, idealistic detective in Vice, desperate to make homicide, believing in the job, the badge, the investigation. By the end, she's not just compromised. She's literally collateral damage on Dexter's operating table of control. Let's kick things off with that trajectory. Season by season, Deb moves from trusting Dexter as the one stable person in her chaotic psychology, to covering for him, to actively becoming his accomplice. She shoots Lagerda to protect his secret. She helps move bodies. She participates in cover stories that should trigger internal affairs reviews and psychological evaluations. The focus is not just on her moral slide, but on how the world around her refuses to respond the way an actual police department would. Each new compromise should spark an investigation. Instead, it's treated as private family drama. Then the show literalizes that damage. Deb takes a bullet from Saxon, winds up in a hospital, suffers a stroke, and becomes brain dead. On paper, this is the ultimate price of Dexter's life. The code fails, the plan fails, and the person he loves most pays. The doctors explain her condition, Quinn and the others grieve, and Dexter stands there absorbing it as cosmic judgment. But where are the practical consequences? A decorated detective is shot during a manhunt, deteriorates under hospital care, and the narrative barely gestures at malpractice reviews, legal blame, or departmental fallout. To keep this clear, Deb's death is framed as fate, not as a chain of procedural failures that would trigger investigations, lawsuits, and media scrutiny. Dexter decides to end her suffering, unplugs her ventilator, and wheels her out of a monitored ICU in the middle of a hurricane evacuation. No alarms. No nurses questioning why a blood-spattered forensic analyst is pushing a corpse through the halls. No cameras. In a hospital that just treated a high-profile shooting victim, he somehow has more freedom than he ever does in an alley. And then there's the image. Dexter carrying Deb's body onto the boat, wrapped in a sheet, and dropping her into the same ocean where he dumped his victims. It's haunting. It's thematically perfect. It's also a massive procedural impossibility. A cop's body disappears during an active homicide case, and nobody locks down the docks. Nobody pulls security footage, checks his GPs, questions his chain of custody. The central question becomes, if Deb is the price, why are the consequences so carefully trimmed away? In this video, we're going to keep returning to that pattern. Emotionally heavy, visually striking, but allergic to full, real-world implications. Deb's fate is not just tragic. It's the template. Because if the show can bend an entire hospital around Dexter's final gesture, what else is it quietly rewriting to keep his myth alive? So when we reach Iron Lake, the show finally tries to answer the question it's been dodging for 8 seasons. What happens when the myth runs out of places to hide? The cabin clearing, the rifle, the snow stained with Dexter's blood, it all feels stripped down, almost brutally honest, compared to the hospital contortions we just saw. Dexter is on his knees. Harrison is aiming the gun. And for once, there is no clever plan, no hidden blade, no last-minute investigation twist that can rescue him. We watch Dexter confess in stages, first to killing Logan, then to the pattern beneath it, then to the rot at the center of Harry's code. He tells Harrison that Logan's death was a mistake, a necessary casualty. But the more he talks, the more it sounds like every rationalization we've heard before, replayed 1 season too late. Harrison's plea cuts through that fog. He doesn't argue the evidence, he argues the psychology. He repeats Dexter's own words about only killing people who deserve it, about never harming the innocent, and then holds up Logan as the counterexample that breaks the system. In that moment, the focus is not just on what Dexter did in Iron Lake, but on the entire trajectory of bodies, lies, and exceptions trailing behind him. And then Harrison makes the decision the show has refused to make. He pulls the trigger. No tribunal, no elaborate cover story, no institutional failure to blame. Just a direct, personal consequence delivered by the one character the narrative cannot easily write off. It's the bullet that finally pierces the plot armor. To keep this clear, think about how every previous reckoning evaporated. Dokes dies in an explosion framed as Bay Harbor butcher justice. Leela, Miguel, Trinity, Saxon. Each investigation collapses at the exact point where a real-world system would harden around Dexter. Evidence disappears. Witnesses die. Miami Metro looks away. Along the way, the show trains us to expect another lucky escape, another rewritten crime scene. Iron Lake breaks that pattern by making the system a single teenager with a rifle and a conscience. It's almost ironic to the point of cruelty. Not the FBI, not LaGuerta, not Deb, not Angela with her case files. It takes Dexter's own son to finally hold him accountable in a way the narrative cannot undo with a new season or a new identity. In this video, we're going to treat Harrison's choice as a belated correction to the biggest plot hole of all, the fantasy that Dexter could keep doing this forever. Each major section will circle this moment as the endpoint of a long, failing experiment in control. Because if it ultimately requires patricide in the snow to close the file on the Bay Harbor butcher, what does that say about everything the show had to ignore to keep him alive up to this point? So here's where all of this gets uncomfortable. We've just traced a trajectory where the only way to end Dexter's story is with an almost operatic act of violence. But to get there, the show has to skate past a minefield of investigations, witnesses, and forensic realities that should have buried him seasons earlier. And yet, most of us kept watching. We cared. We were tense. We were in it. That's the paradox. On paper, the plot armor is glaring. Blood evidence disappears. Chain of custody bends. Surveillance cameras blink off at the exact right second. In practice, the character work, the atmosphere, the psychology of this man narrating his own monstrosity is so compelling that we either don't see the cracks or we quietly decide they're an acceptable price of admission. How many people notice that Dexter contaminates active crime scenes with his bare hands, then still treats the lab as sacred ground? We clock it, we shrug, we move on. Because the focus is not just on procedure. It's on the dread of whether his illusion of control will finally collapse. So the central question becomes, if the series actually honored its own rules, when should he have been caught? Was it the moment Dokes opened that box of blood slides and the Bay Harbor butcher investigation pointed straight back to the one analyst who touched every file? Was it when LaGuerta matched the marina records and boat traces, essentially reverse engineering his entire dumping plan? Or even earlier, when a guy who just happens to work blood spatter keeps orbiting every major serial case Miami Metro touches? To keep this clear, we're not asking when the police could have caught him in a perfect world. We're asking when the show's own internal logic says, this is it. The game is over. Because depending on your threshold, these gaps land very differently. For some, they're deal breakers. Once you notice that no one ever audits Dexter's lab work, that multiple suspects die the second they suspect him, that key evidence like the blood slides is always destroyed by fire, explosion, or narrative convenience, the spell shatters. For others, they're minor annoyances. The background noise of a heightened genre where a serial killer can also be a meticulous dad and a functioning coworker. And for a third group, the implausibility is the point. The fact that he survives this long, on this much narrative luck, becomes part of the tragedy. In this video, we're going to lean into that last reading. Sometimes the very unreality of Dexter's survival makes the irony sharper. A man who believes in his plan, his code, his control, floating on a sea of coincidences he mistakes for skill. Along the way, we'll test where your own line is. Which escape makes you roll your eyes? Which close call still works emotionally, even if the investigation should have nailed him? And as we move into the next section, we'll map the exact pressure points where the fiction bends the hardest to keep him breathing, and what that bending costs the story. So here's the experiment. Instead of tracking every time Dexter pulls off the impossible, we track every time the plan fractures and the world politely looks away. we stop watching for mastery. We start watching for failure that should have ended the story. To keep this clear, imagine a rewatch that orbits four anchors: Season 2, Season 4, Season 7, and New Blood. These are the eras where the illusion of control is loudest and the cracks are widest. In Season 2, follow the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation beat by beat. Dexter's blood slides in Dokes' hands, the dive team pulling up bags of bodies, LaGuerta questioning timelines. How many separate investigations should have spun off from that case alone? Internal review of Dexter's lab work. Chain of custody audits. A psychological evaluation after his name is even whispered in connection with Dokes. Now do the same thing in Season 4. Trinity isn't just a mirror, he's a stress test. Every time Dexter disappears from family events, misses work, or shows up at Trinity crime scenes with oddly personal insight, ask, what would a real task force do here? Who logs those absences? Who notices the analyst who keeps orbiting the worst murders in Miami? The focus is not just on Dexter's next kill room, but on Rita's worried glances, Deb's half-finished suspicions, Quinn's instinct that never quite gets institutional backup. In Season 7, the rewatch becomes almost cruel. Hannah knows his methods. Deb knows his code. LaGuerta reopens Bay Harbor. Surveillance cameras exist. GPS records exist. Cell tower data exists. And yet the investigation keeps swerving away from the one man connecting all these threads. Watch background extras, offhand lines, the way reports are filed and then never mentioned again. Along the way, we see how the universe keeps cushioning Dexter from the full consequences of his own collapse. Then we land in New Blood, where technology and small-town scrutiny should make Iron Lake a forensic minefield. Every near miss with Harrison, every suspicious death, every missing person that brushes against Jim Lindsay becomes a thought experiment. If this were a real jurisdiction, who would talk? What evidence would linger in the snow, in the school, in the police database? How many times would an outside agency be called in? In this video, we're going to treat that mental exercise as the real story. We imagine the investigations that never happen, the reports that should exist, the witnesses who would not stay quiet. Dexter's trajectory stops being a power fantasy and becomes a catalog of almost exposures, institutional blind spots, and people choosing, consciously or not, to protect a man who keeps insisting he's a necessary monster. Rewatching this way doesn't just fuel nitpicks, it sharpens the tension. Every convenient escape becomes a question. Is this character blind, compromised, or is the narrative itself bending to keep him alive? And in the next section, we're going to push that even further by isolating the single most egregious escapes and asking whether the story actually survives if we stop letting him get away with them. So let's kick things off like a rapid-fire confession reel, because the secret history of Dexter's worst written escapes reads less like a grounded investigation and more like the universe panicking every time his plan collapses. Dokes in the cabin are our prototype. Dexter's plan is simple: stall, contain, maybe frame. But the failure hits when Dokes finds the blood-slides and the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation finally has tangible proof. Then the glitch. Leela appears from nowhere, blows up the cabin, and the explosion erases the evidence, the witness, and the need for Miami Metro to ever ask why their blood guy was vacationing with a trunk full of trophies. LaGuerta in the shipping containers, the same structure with higher emotional stakes. Dexter's plan is to discredit her, plant evidence, and let procedure grind her career down. But the failure comes when she catches him dumping the Bay Harbor bodies and drags Deb into a confrontation that should end the series. The plot device? A perfect no-witness standoff, a conveniently isolated location, and Deb's instantaneous choice to shoot her boss instead of arresting her brother, followed by an investigation that never meaningfully reconstructs who had motive, means, or access. Jump to the hospital hurricane escape, where control is already gone. Dexter's plan is to mercy kill Deb, fake a boating accident, and disappear into the storm, yet the failure is baked in, a major hospital loses a critical patient, a body vanishes, security cameras exist, and law enforcement is supposedly on high alert. The universe glitches again. The storm swallows the boat, swallows the body, swallows every digital trace, and the system that has hunted the Bay Harbor Butcher just shrugs as if a comatose detective and her brother evaporating during a natural disaster raises no red flags at all. Then Iron Lake stretches this pattern to absurdity. Dexter's plan is low profile, new name, small town, rigid routine. But the failure arrives the moment he kills Matt Caldwell and leaves a trail that would light up any real investigation. Instead of immediate forensic scrutiny, we get delayed suspicions, a sheriff girlfriend who keeps confiding in him, and a town where cameras, databases, and interagency communication only function when the plot wants tension, not when they would instantly expose him. To keep this clear, each of these escapes shares the same trajectory: a plan that fails, a moment where normal consequences should close in, and then a narrative intervention that suspends evidence, psychology, and basic human behavior. The focus is not just on Dexter slipping away, but on reality itself stepping aside to let him pass. And once we see that, the central question shifts. Are we watching a meticulous killer outsmart the world, or a doomed man repeatedly rescued by the code of plot armor? In this video, we're going to push that tension even further by asking what happens to Dexter's story if we strip those escapes away and let the consequences actually land. So when we strip those escapes away and let the consequences land, what's left? Dexter's life stops looking like a masterclass in control and starts reading like a case file on failed plans that happen to be rescued by love, luck, and lazy institutions. He thinks he's engineering every outcome. In reality, he's surfing a wave of plot holes and blind spots that keep bailing him out until they don't. To keep this clear, we can go back to the three categories we've been tracking: operational, relational, existential. Operational failures are the nuts and bolts collapses: the syringe in the wrong neck, the blood slides in Dokes' gym bag, the crime scenes Dexter contaminates, the chain of custody he bends, the investigations that should flag him but somehow stall out. Season by season, those mistakes escalate from near misses in Miami to full-blown disasters in Iron Lake, where a small-town department with modern databases still can't connect a fugitive Bay Harbor butcher to the guy dating the chief. Relational failures are the fractures in the web that's supposed to protect him: Harry's code, Deb's loyalty, Rita's domestic fantasy, Hannah's outlaw romance, Harrison's hunger for a father figure. Each connection begins as a safeguard, a way to stabilize the dark passenger, and each one becomes a pressure point: the more people who know, suspect, or love him. The more the plan of a controlled double life collapses into cover-ups, split-second lies, and desperate damage control. By the time Deb is dragging LaGuerta's body through that shipping container, Dexter's support system is indistinguishable from his list of co-conspirators and victims. Then we hit the existential failures, the ones that define his trajectory. Every attempt to rewrite himself: code-bound avenger, redeemed family man, born-again partner, self-exiled lumberjack, Iron Lake dad, is a grand plan to escape the consequences of the last version. These aren't just character beats, they're full narrative resets, and each reset leans harder on the world looking away: agencies not cross-checking fingerprints, witnesses dying at convenient moments, entire investigations pivoting off Dexter at the exact second he should be cornered. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that tension between narrative satisfaction and realism, because Dexter walks that line more precariously than most prestige dramas. We expect some contrivance in any long-running series, but here, the very fantasy of control we're sold in Dexter's narration is constantly undercut by how much the universe has to bend to keep him free. How many times can a blood analyst vanish during active cases before someone runs an internal audit? How many bodies can orbit one man without the story itself admitting the pattern? The focus is not just on pointing at errors for sport, but on what those gaps reveal about Dexter's psychology. He believes the code works because he's still standing. He believes he's meticulous because he hasn't been caught. Yet from the pilot to New Blood, every success is balanced on procedural shortcuts, emotional cover, and narrative mercy. So picture him in three overlapping frames: alone in the storm on his boat, alone in the woods as Jim Lindsay, alone in a plastic draped kill room. In each image, he thinks he's the one holding the knife, the one writing the script. He never looks down at the cracks beneath his feet, at the investigations that should have swallowed him seasons ago. And that's the final verdict on Dexter Morgan: not a god of control, but a man whose plans fail so completely that only plot armor and broken systems make his story possible at all. So now that we've pulled back the curtain on just how much plot armor Dexter is wearing, we need to hand the case file over to you. If Miami Metro, the FBI, and basic forensic procedure hadn't collapsed on contact with the script, when do you think this fade would have actually shattered? Let's kick things off with the central question. Comment with the exact moment where, in your view, Dexter realistically should have been caught. Is it Doak standing in that cabin with the blood slides in his hand, backed by an ongoing Bay Harbor butcher investigation that should have triggered a full internal audit? Is it LaGuerta connecting Dexter's boat records to the dump sites and literally staging a sting operation around his pattern? Or is it Angela in Iron Lake, with access to internet databases, Miami case files, and a boyfriend whose past is a walking red flag? Where does the investigation, if anyone were doing their job, become inescapable? To keep this clear, think like an actual task force. Look at the magically disappearing blood evidence, the contaminated crime scenes, the way Dexter vanishes during active manhunts. At what point does a real supervisor say, pull his lab work, pull his GPs, pull his personnel file, and never let him near another body again? That timestamp is your answer. Put it in the comments. Then, we want you to go deeper. Name the one Dexter plot hole that bothers you the most, the one that breaks the internal logic of the code and the world. Maybe it's how no one ever re-examines Doak's alleged guilt after his death. Maybe it's Hannah walking away from multiple investigations with barely a paper trail. Maybe it's the fact that so many people know or suspect the truth. Leela, Miguel, Lumen, Saxon, and yet the system never builds a durable case. And after that, balance the scales. What is one plot hole you're willing to forgive for the sake of entertainment? The focus is not just on nitpicking, but on revealing what we're willing to trade away to keep the fantasy of control alive. Do you let the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force incompetence slide because those seasons are too compelling? Do you accept Angela's late-game detective work because finally someone sees him? Along the way, pitch us your alternate timelines. How does the entire trajectory of the series change if Doakes lives and quietly keeps Dexter under surveillance? What if LaGuerta's case actually sticks, and Season 7 ends with a courtroom instead of a shipping container? What if Angela gets 6 more months, full access to Miami's evidence, and a task force that believes her? Think of the comment section as our collaborative forensic lab. We're all sifting through the narrative evidence the show tried to bury, reconstructing the story Dexter tells himself versus the story the facts actually support. Because once we've mapped out where he should have been caught, we can finally ask the more unsettling question: why did the writers keep letting him walk away? And what does that reveal about our own psychology as viewers? And that's where we come in. If the writers won't run the investigation, we will. If Miami Metro can't follow the trail of blood, we can follow the trail of broken logic, failed plans, and psychological blind spots the show would rather we ignore. In this video, we're going to treat Dexter the way Dexter treats a crime scene: slow, methodical, and merciless. The focus is not just on catching individual plot holes, but on understanding why they were created, how they protect the illusion of control, and what they reveal about our own willingness to look away when the fantasy feels good. If that kind of forensic storytelling is your thing, this is the channel you want on your side before the evidence disappears into the ocean. So, let's kick things off with the most obvious invitation: subscribe. Because this is just the opening file in a much bigger case. Along the way, we're going to build alternate, realistic endings for Dexter that actually follow the consequences of his choices, not the convenience of his plot armor. What happens if the blood slides survive? What happens if one random CCTV camera in Miami does its job? What happens if Harrison doesn't accept the story Dexter is selling in Iron Lake? Each major section will spiral out into its own deep dive. We're planning full breakdowns of other antiheroes whose plans collapse under scrutiny: Walter White's ego-driven strategy, Joe Goldberg's delusional romantic code, even characters like Villanelle who believe charisma can replace logistics. Season by season, we'll rewrite trajectories, close the loopholes, and ask the central question: if these people actually lived in a world that worked like ours, how long would they last? Here's the pattern interrupt. This isn't just about Dexter. It's about us. Why do we defend his perfect planning when we've watched him contaminate crime scenes, vanish during active manhunts, and walk away from investigations that should have nailed him in a day? Share this video with the friend who still insists Harry's code was airtight, or the one who swears Dexter only got caught in New Blood because he slipped. Give them fuel for that late night debate about whether he was ever in control, or whether we were just accomplices to the myth. To keep this clear, subscribing isn't a casual click here. It's joining a long-form, ongoing case file where no plan, no character, and no beloved show is safe from this level of scrutiny. We will revisit every season, reopen every convenient coincidence, and treat plot armor like evidence tampering. If Dexter taught us anything, it's that the story people tell about themselves is rarely the whole truth. Around here, we don't stop at the story. We keep digging until the narrative collapses.